Hey, everybody, this is Tom Sega from Duluth Pack, and this is the Duluth Pack podcast, Leader of the Pack. Our leader today is a special guest, easy for me to say, Heather Smith. Heather is the owner of Twin Ports Dermatology. She is a MPAS and a PAC, and we're going to get into that. But first, welcome, Heather.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It's great to have you here, and we're excited to have you. So before we jump in, some of these acronyms for us lay people out here, could you explain a little bit? What is an MPAS, first of all?
Well, it's just a bunch of letters to make me look smart. No, I'm just kidding. So MPAS, basically, it's a Master's of Physician Assistant Studies. And then PAC is Physician Assistant Certified. So that just means that I've taken the national certification test to practice nationally.
Perfect. Well, we want you to have all those certifications if you're working on us. So that's a good, that gives all of us out here a lot of feel good that you've taken the test and you've done all the education, and you are the owner of your own business. So we'll get into that in a minute, because we talk a lot of entrepreneurship and not only having all your specialties, but then owning a business on top of that. That's got to be a handful. But before we do that, let's just talk about you a little bit. Where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like, and where did you go to school, and then how in the heck did you end up in dermatology?
Sure. I grew up in the Twin Cities in a town called Inver Grove Heights. I kind of grew up a little bit in the country. I had 5 acres. I had a good childhood. I have great memories. We had a family cabin. We spent most of our summer weekends up there. We did a lot of camping, four-wheeling, snowmobiling. I was in a lot of sports, soccer, softball, gymnastics, dance. I went to high school. I went to Rosemont High School. I graduated my undergraduate, the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, with a Bachelor's of Science in Health and Wellness. And then I got my master's degree from Des Moines University down in Iowa.
And that was the MPAS.
You got it.
Perfect. And so at that point, did you know that you wanted to have your specialty in dermatology?
Not right when I started PA school, but my very first day of my dermatology rotation, I knew my first day of my rotation, and I made sure to interview with the dermatologist I was rotating with before my rotation was over. I was 4 months away from graduation, and I said, I want to sit down and interview with you because I want to work here. And so I had a job 4 months before I graduated, and it was really great.
And what year was that?
That was 2009 that I graduated.
Okay. And jobs at that point were probably a little tight. The economy was in a kind of a funky area, but you have a job 4 months before you graduate.
Yeah, and especially dermatology. It was kind of hard to get into dermatology. So I felt very blessed to definitely be set up like that.
And how many years did it take to get your master's degree?
So that was a 2-year program. Most PA programs are 2 years, some are 3.
Okay. And let's talk about the beginning of your career and when you first started practicing with that place that offered you the job.
Sure. Yeah, it was great. I worked for a great dermatologist. He gave me great training. So when I first came out of PA school, in PA school, you kind of rotate through all the different specialists or specialties. You're trained to be basically a generalist. So you can come out of PA school and you can work in any specialty. And of course, you'll get more specialized training based on where you decide to work. So when I decided I wanted to work in dermatology, I got a lot of side-by-side training with my supervising physician, months and months and months of side-by-side training with him. I didn't even have my own patient schedule. I just worked side-by-side with him, and I learned so much with him. And I think probably one of the best things is he had so much faith in me as a PA He really spoke highly of me. He had a lot of confidence in me. And that really gave me the confidence to grow as a provider and learn so much from him. There was no intimidation. I could ask any question that I needed to, and I was able to just absorb so much in those first several months. So after my training was over with him, then I acquired my own schedule, and I independently saw patients on my own. And it was a private practice in the Burnsville area in the Twin Cities. And I worked there for about 6 years before coming up to the Duluth area to start Twin Ports Dermatology.
Heather, if there was somebody who was listening to this and, they're in college right now and they're like, that the field of dermatology seems really interesting to me. What advice could you give somebody before they would go to PA school or before they would want a specialty like you have on what they may want to do to make that road as seamless as possible?
Mm-hmm. It's just in general, it's getting harder and harder to get into PA school because it's becoming such a popular profession. I think the last time I looked at the statistics, they actually are saying it's harder to get into PA school than it is to get into med school. So I would just say, just in general, when you are applying to PA school, just start your application early so you have time to build the best application that you can. You want to, have as much variety as you can on your application, because a 4.0 and a 4.0 on two applications looks the exact same. So you want to work in patient care. I mean, you want to show them that you can do the dirty work. You can be a nursing assistant in a nursing home. You want to have volunteer work, and you want to do it in multiple different areas. You want to go on mission trips, hopefully, COVID settling down so we can do more traveling and you can go to some of these third world countries if, if the world gets to be a little better place, and you can show that you're willing to do that. Basically, just show multiple different colors on your application. And I think that you'll definitely have a number one better chance of getting into PA school, and shadowing PAs as well. And if dermatology is your interest, shadowing PAs in dermatology, I definitely think that that would make your application stronger, and building those relationships early. So then you have those PAs to fall back on after graduation, and you can potentially look for a job.
So the competition's getting really tight, and build a resume and build it early if this is your focus that you'd like to go into for a career.
Absolutely.
So you come to Duluth, you mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
And are we at the point where we're talking about the creation of Twin Ports Dermatology at this point?
Sure, we can be, yeah.
So how did that look like for you then?
It was kind of a fluke. It kind of just fell on our laps, and it was nothing that we had ever planned. It was nothing like I never dreamed of being an entrepreneur. I'm actually really glad that it did fall on our lap. But I don't know if you know kind of our story of how everything happened, but I was working down in the Twin Cities, and I actually loved my job. I had no plans on leaving. And my mother-in-law called me one day, and she just said, "Hey, I have this really dark mole on my back." And I tried calling the two hospitals in Duluth to have it checked out because my husband's from Duluth. And she was told 9 months and 12 months at the time. And so this would have been about 8 or 9 years ago now. And she just said, "I think it should be looked at sooner." And I said, "Yeah, no problem. Come down to the cities. We'll check it out." And we biopsied it, and it was melanoma. And it was a fairly deep melanoma that if she would have waited that time, she may not be here today. So that was definitely strike one. And so I tried to just put it in the back of my mind that maybe this was just a fluke case. And then, believe it or not, so Burnsville is a little bit more on the south metro of the Twin Cities. I started to see patients show up on my schedule with Duluth addresses. And I just thought, what is going on here? And I started asking them, "Why are you coming down here?" And they said, "We can't get in up there." And so, I started thinking more and more about it. And I just felt like, I think this is my calling. I need to go up and help this underserved community. My husband's from there, so we have a tie to the area. And I'm really glad that we did. I mean, I definitely think that this is what we are meant to do. So that's history. That's, why we decided to do it. And here we are.
From that time frame when you go, hey, there's a need up there, and we're going to, I guess, push the chips in and become entrepreneurs and do this. How long from the concept to the creation? What kind of time frame are we talking about, Heather?
I think it was about 18 months.
And during that time, what kind of work had to go into it for you to literally get it up and rolling? Because there's a lot of equipment that obviously goes into what you do in the medical profession.
It was pretty funny, Tom. The day that my husband and I decided, okay, we're going to do this, we hemmed and hawed about it for weeks because it's a big endeavor, as you can imagine, and we had never done it before. They don't teach you how to open up your own clinic in medical school or PA school. They basically teach you how you need to treat your patient. So we knew it was a big thing, but my heartstrings were pulling on me, so I knew I had to do it. So we said, okay, we're going to do this. And we told our family. They, got very excited for us. And the very next day, I got a positive pregnancy test that we were pregnant with our first child. And I said, okay, well, I made my decision up. We're still doing it. So had our first child. We were living in the Twin Cities, starting Twin Ports Dermatology, doing everything from afar. So that was tough. Definitely everything was remote that we were doing. We were making weekly trips up. So once my son was born, we were driving up weekly for meetings, to look at the construction. My son happened to hate the car ride, so we had 2.5 hours of a screaming infant every week that we would have to deal with. Poor child. I think I remember our very first meeting with our attorneys, and I don't even remember what I said because I was so sleep deprived. So there were definitely challenges, but we made it through. And you figure it out every step of the way. There's little roadblocks, but you definitely figure it out.
Do you have to get the facility once you're built or you're outfitted? Do you have to get it certified then? Is there medical certifications? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, you do. You have to have it certified, or I guess examined, I guess you would say, by like the Minnesota Department of Health, and it has to be CLIA certified. And yeah, there are a few certifications that you do have to get.
And opening a business with your spouse.
Yeah, good question. I always wondered how that would be. And it's actually been really good. We form a really good partnership. We really level each other out. Of course, there's going to be days and things that we don't agree on, but we have a pretty good system that we figure things out easily, and we've worked really well together.
And what part of the business does he take care of?
Yeah, so up until now, he's just done a lot of kind of like the back end financial kind of accounting work. He's also held a full-time commercial real estate job up until recently. And then now our business continues to grow. So just actually in the last couple of weeks, he's stepped back from that, and now he's full-time with our business. So he's taking on more administrative business roles within the business.
So Heather, you said that you didn't start out wanting to be an entrepreneur. That wasn't your thought. You saw there was a need as an entrepreneur, which you didn't plan on being. You see that as an opportunity to, hey, here's a way we can move forward and do this. But you're coming into a new market, and you at that point you really didn't have the brand other than a company name. How did you grow your presence of Twin Ports Dermatology in the area here?
Yeah, it did take some time. Definitely, I would say the first couple of years were a little bit slower, but I think even so, just people knowing that there was a new dermatology clinic in town and they could be seen spoke for itself. We did have some amazing marketing efforts in-house that really helped to grow the brand. And I think just providing great care, that word travels. So that I think that's the best type of marketing.
Word of mouth can definitely be strong, and we're a small community up here, so that word of mouth can definitely help. Let's get a little bit into some of, maybe not procedures yet, but just talking about skincare is something that can be very sensitive and specific. And what does a client experience typically look like when you're having a consult with I guess a prospective or a new patient?
Sure. Well, of course, we have, a couple different areas of our clinic. So we have more of the medical surgical aspect, and then we have our medical spa, which is more of the cosmetic area. So if someone wanted to come in for a skincare consultation, that would occur in our medical spa with one of our amazing estheticians. And it's all complimentary. And we decided to all keep it complimentary because we want someone to come in and have no pressure on feeling like they have to purchase something. So they would come in and they would be able to spend 30 minutes of time with the esthetician and talk about what their concerns are with their skin and what their goals are with their skin. The esthetician would then evaluate their skin, and they would kind of come up with a treatment plan for what they felt would benefit the patient. So that might include, skincare. It might include different procedures or treatments that we offer in office. And there's never any pressure. So our goal is basically we give you the education so then you can make the decision. If you walk out of there and you purchase nothing, that's okay. We just want you to feel comfortable with what decision you make.
Heather, what would be the most common thing people would come in for on a consult?
So, in the med spa, we have kind of two separate areas. We have the estheticians that do more like the skincare, the chemical peels, microneedling. I would definitely say the esthetician's most common thing that people come in for would be skincare consults and then chemical peels. And then we have the nurses who do the injectable treatments, and Botox and filler are probably going to be the most common thing that they see.
Okay, so these would not be considered the medical part of the business?
Nope. So that's more of the cosmetic. So then the medical part, we do see a lot of acne, and we do a lot of skin cancer screenings, which is really, really important.
Is that growing these days? I know that some of the statistics that I have here are 1 in 5 people will have skin cancer in their life in today's date. So is that a growing part of the business? Just that so many people have abused themselves in the sun?
Yeah. Yes, it's a huge thing. And we really promote skin cancer screenings. And I don't think I don't think it was promoted up here until we came to town, because number one, you could barely get in to see a dermatologist. So if you could get in, you had to have something really bad on your skin. You couldn't just get in for a preventative exam. And that's not how healthcare should be. I mean, we really believe in preventative care because as dermatology providers, we're trained to see things on your skin before you even know they're there. So if we can spot these tiny little changes, we can hopefully find these skin cancers and remove them where there's not a huge scar and there's not a large defect. So what's recommended really is everybody over the age of 40 should be coming in for annual full skin cancer screenings. And that should be done by a dermatology provider, not by a primary care provider. Kind of the same as like, I don't treat your high blood pressure. I don't treat your diabetes. They shouldn't be treating your skin. We get you in a gown. We look through your entire scalp. We look you over head to toe. We look at your fingernails. We look in between your fingers. We look in between your toes. We look on every ounce of your skin. And we're looking at you close. We use special dermatoscopes, which are little microscopes for the skin to look at the cells of every mole and skin lesion. So it's a very detailed exam, like I said, to catch skin cancer very, very early. So yes, I mean, definitely people are abusing the sun. The rates of skin cancer up in Minnesota are actually just as high as places down in Florida. And that's because we get our 3 months of nice weather. And what are we doing? We're out there soaking it up. Whereas Florida, that's normal for them to have nice weather all year round. So,
do you see a common theme of people coming in? Let's talk about the skin cancer part of the business. Do you see a common theme, Heather, of people that have the same concerns over and over again when they're coming in? Or is it the people you're seeing people that come in and have gotten on a schedule of annual that, hey, I'm putting it in your hands, just you have all your notes, check me over?
We do have a lot of people that will continue to come in for their yearly skin checks, but the nice thing is once you create that trust with the patient, they will, if they have future concerns, like say their full skin check might turn into all of a sudden they develop a new concern of psoriasis. And then they're going to trust you to treat their psoriasis, or they develop athlete's foot, or, it might morph into other skin concerns, and they're going to trust you to take care of those skin concerns as well.
Heather, what is a typical day? And I know that's a loaded question, but in your profession that so many of us, you're a clinician, but then you're also a business owner. What does a typical day look like for Heather?
Yeah. Other than running around like a chicken with my head cut off, no. No, I mean, every day is so different. We have some template to our schedule, but it does vary quite a bit. So we have, different procedural surgical blocks throughout our day where we're going to be doing either skin cancer removals or benign cyst lipoma removals. So they'll be kind of scattered various points throughout the day. So some days we might just do a couple, other days we might be doing, 6 skin cancer benign lesion removals. The rest of the day would be a variety of, say, acne, psoriasis, eczema. I mean, we could see 30 different diagnoses in one day, maybe even more. Our first patient is usually at about 8 o'clock. We'll see patients until about noon. And then we'll start up again at 1 and see patients until about 5. And then we'll do some documenting after that. And I'll usually leave the office around about 5:45 or 6.
Heather, what is your favorite type of customer interaction that you get to have?
It's changed a lot over the years. I would say early in my practice, I liked the really easy ones that they would come in and I would be like, oh, I know what this is. Quick and easy. Done. But now I actually really enjoy the difficult ones that the patients are really struggling with something that's affecting their life. And I can create that trust with them. I can create that bond and that relationship with them. And I know that I can help them with their skin concern. And then when I have them come back for that second visit, all I have to do is walk in the room and look at their face, and I don't even have to say anything, and I know they're better. So just those life-changing conditions. I mean, usually they're rashes of some type, debilitating rashes. Itch is one of the most anxiety-producing symptoms. If you've ever had hives, or if you've ever, developed an allergy to a medication you've been on, those can be really rewarding conditions to treat.
Okay, I'm going to go off script here because I've talked to more people this winter. Now, a lot of our listeners are up here in the Northland. We have very cold, extremely dry winters. And I've talked to and experienced this winter more itching than ever.
Yes.
What's the deal?
Oh, well, our weather is horrible for itching. But I know a lot of people aren't great at using moisturizer. Especially guys. It's not a cool guy thing to do to wear moisturizer, I know. But
see these hands?
Yes.
Not good.
Yes. But that's probably one of the best things you can do is just as soon as you get out of the shower, just put a moisturizer on head to toe. One of the best moisturizers is CeraVe cream. It just has some of the best ingredients to restore the barrier of your skin.
So how does it do that?
Well, so our skin is made of multiple different things. I mean, you think of your skin as uh, um, like a cookie recipe. So there's multiple different ingredients in a recipe to make cookies. And if you forget one of the ingredients, your cookies don't really turn out. Kind of the same with your skin. When your skin dries out, you actually lose components from your skin. And so if you just go to the dollar store or you go grab a cheap moisturizer and you're just putting that on your skin, it might hydrate your skin, but it's not restoring everything you need into your skin to make it fully functional. So CeraVe moisturizer, it has all of those good things you need. It has hyaluronic acid, it has ceramides, it has cholesterol, it has lipids, it has the hydration. I mean, it's really putting your skin back into its functional form. So, it can do what it's supposed to do.
And this is something people can order off the internet, or they can go to the store and buy this. This is not a
Nope,
prescription
nope, just
type of
CVS,
medicine.
Target, Walgreens, Walmart, anywhere. Yep.
Perfect. Heather, what type, you're not a hospital, and stereotypically we all think of surgery as going to the hospital and having surgery.
Yeah.
But you are Twin Ports Dermatology, a dermatology clinic, but you do surgical procedures within your clinic.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those types of procedures? You talked about some skin cancers, but you get into some pretty invasive type of surgeries?
No, they're not too invasive. I guess more of like what the general population would think of it. I guess you could think of it more as procedural dermatology. So it could range from even minor things like skin biopsies. We do multiple skin biopsies on a daily basis just to remove concerning lesions to test them for skin cancer or abnormal cells. We'll remove like the cysts and the lipomas that I spoke of earlier. We'll remove skin cancers. We'll do something called an excision, where you're basically cutting around the visible skin cancer, going below it, removing it, and suturing it up. We do the Mohs micrographic surgery, and that's a tissue sparing procedure. Usually we'll do it on the head or the neck or any cosmetically sensitive areas. And that's where, rather than taking a larger margin like we would take on the body or areas that do have tissue to spare, we're going to take just a very small margin around that cancer, and we're going to bring it right back into our lab at Twin Ports Dermatology, and we are going to test the margins while you're still in the office. And then if it's clear and there's no cancer left, we're going to go right back in and we're going to close up the site. If there is a positive margin, we're going to go back in and just take a little bit more tissue from the area, come back and test it again. So it's just a way to save that healthy tissue in a very cosmetically sensitive area.
And is this a new technology, or is this one that's been around for a while?
No, it's been around for a long time.
Okay. And you're talking a lot about skin cancer because it's on everybody's mind. And, we're actually taping this a little bit earlier, coming into the summer here. What advice can you give to people to keep their chances, I guess, to thwart their chances of getting skin cancer?
Probably the biggest advice is to honestly wear sunscreen every day, 365 days of the year. And you might think that's crazy, but another thing that we're finding out is that it's not just the sun that causes damage to our skin, it's our technology. And who doesn't sit in front of a computer every day these days? Who doesn't sit in front of their phone? There's something called blue light that's emitted from our technology, and it damages the skin. And so, the best way to prevent that is just to wear a daily SPF. And you can get nice cosmetically moisturizers with the SPF in it. So you don't have to be putting on thick, greasy sunscreens on a daily basis. You can get lightweight sunscreens.
I hear people talk about the blue light from computers, and they have special glasses so that their eyes don't hurt or get sore.
Mm-hmm.
But we emit from our computers, which can be creating skin cancer?
Skin cancer and damage to our skin that can cause premature aging.
Holy moly. Maybe that's what happened to me here, right? That's why I'm prematurely aged here as I get to sit in front of the computer all day these days. What changes have you seen in the 12 years that you've had your business and been an entrepreneur? What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen and technological changes that have helped advance your business?
In dermatology itself, probably some of the most exciting things that I've seen is some of the medications that have come out. More recently, treatments for psoriasis and eczema or atopic dermatitis. In the past, if we needed to treat conditions that were treat psoriasis that was, say, very severe, we would have to suppress the immune system pretty significantly. And now, with research over the years, they've been able to isolate various components of the immune system and just target those components and suppress those. So these medications are much safer for the patient. They're actually faster acting. And it's very effective. So that's been really cool to see. I mean, these medications are life changing, and safety is a huge issue for medications that patients would have to potentially stay on long term.
So psoriasis is like an immune deficiency syndrome,
It's
or how do you go?
it's not necessarily a immune deficiency syndrome. We used to almost say that it was an autoimmune condition, but rather we're thinking of it more so lately as a almost an over-inflammatory process in the immune system. There's too much inflammation, and you have all these different factors in your immune system, and the inflammation level is too high, causing excess inflammation in your skin. That can cause plaques on various areas, those thick, dry, scaly plaques. It can cause inflammation in the joints, leading to psoriatic arthritis. So the goal with a lot of these medications is to basically attract those various components that are causing too much inflammation and suppress them.
So we're coming out of COVID. Obviously, everybody's been affected by COVID. Our business was deemed non-essential, so we had to shut down at the beginning of this a couple of years ago, and it was horrible. How has it affected your business?
Probably the biggest thing initially, we've gotten a little bit out of this, but we really had to learn how to roll with the punches. There were no protocols for certain scenarios when COVID first hit. We just had to roll with the punches. Someone wanted to buy something when all of our systems were down. We had to maybe use Venmo. We had to do various consults over the phone, or we had to get new online programs that were HIPAA compliant, that we could do different consults and different telemedicine visits per se. So we did have to learn how to adjust to still providing care that was necessary. But we've been able, for the most part, to go back to our old ways of practicing. And thankfully, hopefully it stays that way.
Heather, did you see, or first of all, did you have to close down? And then I'm interested in some of this technology, because you obviously have HIPAA regulations that you mentioned there. I'd like to go a little bit further into that. But did you have to close down at the very beginning?
We did, yes. So I guess the clinic did not have to close down, but we did choose to close down for the first 6 weeks, unless it was emergent conditions. So we really didn't do much for the first few weeks. And then we did start to do some emergent surgical conditions for, it's like melanoma cancers that needed to be removed, very debilitating rashes and concerning lesions. The med spa was closed for, I want to say, close to 4 months, because of course that was elective. And then once the clinic opened back up, the majority of our visits were all virtual. And we gradually had to wean back into, normal visits. And that took several months. I would say probably we did a variety of virtual visits for probably close to a year.
How do people show you a skin issue over a virtual consult? That had to be very difficult.
That is, and it's very difficult for dermatology because seeing and touching in dermatology is how we diagnose. So yes, it's very difficult. Oftentimes, if someone was coming in for or being seen for a rash or a lesion of concern, we would ask them to send in more clear photos before their visit, because you never know how the camera is going to work and if it's someone who can use the camera appropriately. And if we really couldn't see well, we would have to advise them, we're going to have to get you in as soon as we're able to. So there were some times that we felt like we couldn't provide them the best standard of care because we visibly could not see what we needed to see. And that was really tough, when you're used to be able to give them the best standard of care. There were a lot of things like acne and such that you could still give, the great normal care, but it was really difficult.
That had to be. And talk a little bit about the HIPAA regulations, because, we're doing a Zoom right now and that's fine. But you're up against some very stringent HIPAA regulations, laws and regulations. And can you do a Zoom, or did you have to buy some special software and filters and technology so that you're all HIPAA compliant?
When COVID first started, there is a system we were able to use that was HIPAA compliant. We didn't have to buy it, but then our EMR system was able to establish more of a virtual telemedicine system that was all HIPAA compliant, that was associated with the patient's charts. We were able to just use that.
And now, fast forward, you're virtually back. I shouldn't say virtually because you're trying to get out of virtual, but you're back to what you'd consider normal once again.
We're pretty much back to what we consider normal. And, some patients wanted to continue a lot of those virtual visits. And it was kind of hard because we wanted to offer that. But like I said, the best care for dermatology is to see a person in person. So we wanted to provide that standard of care. So we have pretty much discontinued them, and we just ask patients to come into office now.
Heather, is there a range for the listeners out there? Is there a range of age? I mean, is it generally older people you're seeing? Because of, I'll say we, because I'm in that category now, that end up with more skin issues as we age, and skin cancer could be more prevalent as we age. What would your demographic look like from the standpoint of age?
Not necessarily. I mean, we'll see a lot of babies who struggle with eczema. And then you have the teen group where we'll see warts, acne, and eczema. And then we'll see the young adults who may still struggle with acne. I mean, 40% of young women still have acne. And then you start to get to, the 40s, the 50s and up, who are starting to do their skin checks. They're starting to get the skin cancer. So yes, I mean, we see all ages, babies to elderly. Skin disease affects any age. It doesn't discriminate. And that's another reason why I like the job, is because there is so much variety. I get to treat the skin in all different ages. It makes it interesting, because treating a skin condition in a 10-year-old might look completely different than treating it in a 70-year-old. And it really makes you think differently. So it's fun.
Quite challenging.
Yeah.
Every case has to be completely different. So you have to have your A game on all day.
You sure do.
So during all of this, you decide to expand. down toward the Twin Cities with the Aesthetic Lounge. Can you tell us about that and what was going through your head at that point?
Sure. Well, one of our nurse injectors, Maria, actually lives down in the Twin Cities, and she drives up to Duluth, crazy, I know, to inject on Thursdays and Fridays. And she was looking for a place to inject down there because she had some clients from other facilities that she had worked at. And we just said, it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, she's an amazing employee. She has great skill. It's kind of a no-brainer not to open something and have her inject for us rather than someone else. So we did. We opened a space for her. And, between her and I, we kind of, she helped us a ton starting it up with the design and picking everything out. And since it's been open, I mean, she's kind of run it like it's been her little baby. So, we helped her open it, but it's kind of her baby.
And when did you actually open?
That was last summer.
So the summer of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Right in the middle
in the middle of COVID. Yeah.
Right in the middle of
time.
COVID. And you talk about injecting. Can you expand upon that for us, please?
Sure. So a nurse injector is basically a nurse who does cosmetic injections, which includes basically Botox and filler.
And so that's more of the cosmetic. That clinic would be more cosmetic than it would be medical.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is it's just like a small suite. It's not going to be all the medical and surgical. We don't even offer the the aesthetic services. It's just, it's a very small space. She has her one injecting room down there, and then we have a separate checkout room. We actually do all the checkouts virtually from the Duluth office. So the client will have their service done with Maria, and then they'll go into the separate checkout room and they'll be checked out with one of our front desk staff from Duluth. So it actually works really nice. They receive the same care they would in Duluth, the same vibe. So it's great.
Let's talk about some of the accolades that you've received. It's time to beat our chests a little bit. What does it mean to be a member of the Minnesota and American Academy of Physician Assistants? And what's that all about?
They're just great organizations that provide various CME. They have conferences, events. It's a great organization to be a part of when you are a new PA, when you're a student PA. They have job postings. It's just a great resource to maybe connect with other PAs. Probably my favorite organization that I'm part of is the SDPA because it's more specific to dermatology. So I tend to go to their conferences more often than I do the Lather too. I love to learn more about dermatology than the general medicine nowadays. So I'll go to their conferences usually once every year or so. And I have their, go ahead.
And you're a diplomat member of the SDPA.
Yes, yeah. So the diplomat training was something they established, I want to say about 10 or 11 years ago. And it's kind of a fellowship training for dermatology PAs. So it's really the most advanced training that there is for PAs in dermatology. It's a online, basically they call it a fellowship training program for PAs in dermatology. It's several months of online training that you have to test out of. And I was actually the very first PA in Minnesota to achieve that diplomat status.
Holy moly, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's really cool. And so you're very involved in the different societies and groups that are involved. How were they affected during COVID? Did you have to go to, virtual for the conferences and for some of your learning sessions?
Yeah, definitely all the conferences went virtual, which were tough. I mean, I feel like I don't learn as well through the virtual conferences, but They provided actually a lot of great free virtual training over the last couple of years. And everything's going back to more in person now, which is great. But everything was still available to get your CME. We have to do 100 hours of CME every 2 years, so we still had to maintain that certification during COVID. So we still had to do all of our virtual training. But yeah, it definitely made it difficult.
So that's your continuing education that you have to do to make sure you're up on all the new technology, the new techniques, and that you're keeping up on all of your certifications?
Yeah, part of the NCCPA certification, you have to initially pass your boards, and then you have to do 100 hours of CME training every 2 years, and then you have to retake boards every 10 years. And the boards is actually in all medicine. It's not dermatology specific. So I do have to somewhat stay up on all fields of medicine.
Oh, that's awesome. That makes us feel better.
Yes, yes.
So folks, we're talking with Heather Smith, the owner of Twin Ports Dermatology, and going through all kinds of great things. And if I remember back from high school biology, that our skin is our biggest organ we have. So you're dealing with the biggest organ we have every day. Heather, can you give us first of all, I've been on your website. It's really nice, very informational. Can you give our listeners, what is your website first? And then
Sure.
What are all of your social handles so people can follow you and keep up to date on the latest coming out of Twin Ports Dermatology?
Sure, absolutely. Our website is twinportsderm.com, and we are active on Instagram and Facebook.
And what kind of things can we see on Instagram and Facebook from you?
Oh, we try to post everything. I mean, we try to post specials. We post when we're hiring. We post a lot of skincare tips. We'll post medical information as well, things you should be doing for your skin, any events that might be coming up. We do like to highlight our staff a lot. We'll have some of those fun, pretty pictures, but we think it's important to get our staff up on those photos and show the community what treatments our staff likes to do and what products our staff likes to use, because we're real people too, and we use these products. We do these services.
Oh, that's awesome. So twinportsderm.com. They can see your awesome website. They can see the history of the company, your employees, the different services that you offer to people.
Yes.
So we're going to change direction here, Heather, a little bit. Now we're going to go a little bit personalized. We want to learn a little bit more about you. And we call this our packed question segment.
All right.
So what are your favorite hobbies outside of work? We talk work enough. What do you like to do?
I love being at the cabin. It's probably my favorite place to be when the weather's nice. So both of our families have cabins. I love yoga. I try to get to yoga whenever I can. Just being with my family. That's probably my favorite thing to do.
What is your biggest accomplishment professionally so far, Heather?
Professionally, probably opening Twin Ports Dermatology.
So becoming that entrepreneur, you have all these credentials and everything, and opening up your own business. That's really cool.
Right. Thank you.
What is your favorite musician or band?
I was thinking about this, and I don't think I have a favorite musician or band. I do love country music, so I think I'm just going to have to go with the genre of country.
That's very much okay. And what is your favorite vacation place? You're going to tell us in the sun right on the equator.
Believe it or not, I love beach vacations, and it's crazy. You'll see me out there in my sundress where my arms are fully covered. I have the big wide brimmed sun hat. I'm reapplying my sunscreen like every hour, and I'm under the umbrella, but I love beach vacations. I just love being in the warmth. But probably my favorite vacation was Puerto Vallarta. That's where my husband and I got married. And we did a destination wedding. We had about 40 of our friends and family join us. And it was amazing. Being on vacation with 40 of your closest friends and family was a dream.
That's awesome. And Heather, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
Well, I'm going to go with a quote, and I have to read this so I don't screw it up. It's the favorite quote that I read over the past several years of opening our business, and I read it often. Entrepreneurship is living a few years of your life like most people won't, so that you can spend the rest of your life like most people can't.
Could you read that for us again? That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Entrepreneurship is living a few years of your life like most people won't, so that you can spend the rest of your life like most people can't.
Listeners, I hope you heard that. That is pretty powerful. Heather, give us your handles and your website for our listeners once more, because we want as many people as we can to grace your presence and come through your doors and take care of their skin.
twinportsderm.com, and we are active on Instagram and Facebook.
And folks, our very special guest today is Heather Smith, the owner of Twin Ports Dermatology. You have the handles. Go see their website. They do awesome work. They take care of a lot of people, and they really care about the people around here. Heather, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate it.
And thank you and Twin Ports Dermatology for your business with our company. We appreciate that very much.
Absolutely. It's been fun.
And folks, until next time, unplug from the indoors and recharge in the outdoors with sunscreen on. Screen on, screen on, screen on. Hey, everybody, this is Tom Sega with Duluth Pack, and this is the Duluth Pack podcast, Leader of the Pack. Today's special guest is a personal friend of mine. I've known him for many, many years, and he is also my accountant. His name is Jim Hacking. He owns James Hacking and Associates, CPA. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here. It's been a while, but great to be back live and having a good conversation at an appropriate time.
Well, I'll tell you what, we certainly hope that you educate some people today and teach some people a little bit about what they can do to prepare for their own personal taxes. But before we do that, Jim, let's go way back and tell us where are you from? Where did you go to high school? Where did you go to college? And at what point did you realize I want to be an accountant?
Well, that's an interesting question, Tom. I'm actually the education background. I'm originally from the Twin Cities. I went to St. Thomas Academy and then the College of St. Thomas. Graduated from there in 1981 with an accounting degree. Cute little anecdote on that is it's now the University of St. Thomas. And when I graduated in 81, the tuition was $3,250, but when you change the name to University of St. Thomas, it's now $50,000 a year to go there. And I'll guarantee you the accounting degree is no better than it was in 1981. So we won't go any further with that, but figure that one out. College versus university, $3,250 versus 50 grand a day. And that's just to go to the school.
Jim, aren't you glad that your kids and my kids are all done with college?
Well, one of them's still working, but we put a cap on it. University of Minnesota, Duluth, you can live at home, laundry will be done, and meals will be provided. The day you tell us you're not going to college, hit the bricks, get out and get a job. Of course, you don't hear that very often anymore, but I was brought up old school by my parents.
Well, you know what? That sometimes that doesn't hurt the kids at all. You got your accounting degree, and then what was your first job?
Well, so then I went to work right away, graduated May of 81, and then in June of 81, thanks to the God, he guided me, and I ended up getting my first job with a small CPA firm in St. Paul, Minnesota, called Mort Compson and Company, and I worked there for 2.5 years, and I literally learned how to do everything from A to Z. And it's interesting that I got that job because actually, truth be known, when I was in college, my sophomore year, my dad was an independent business owner and he asked me, what are you going to do for a major? And of course, we all know the pressure, especially today on young kids with the astronomical costs of college to try to figure out what you want to major in. And I had an answer for my dad. I said, I was thinking about dentistry. And he said, that's interesting. How'd you come up with it? I said, well, it's pretty simple, Dad. I got perfect teeth. I still have my wisdom teeth in, and I do to this day. They make great money and work great hours. And at that point, my dad said, I have a very admirable son, one problem. And I said, what's that, Dad? I've never known you to be a straight A student. What are you going to do with a half-baked science degree if you don't cut the mustard? And I kind of went blah, blah, blah. And I was a little bit of a smart aleck. And I said, well, what would you do? And he says, you know, son, I went to the University of Minnesota, got a general business degree. If I had to do it all over again, I would take accounting. Accounting is the guts of a business. It's what makes the world go round. It's germane to everything. And he said, to be truthful, it's a trade with your brains. You're not using your back and laboring behind a welding machine or running excavators or shoveling dirt. Nothing against any of those things at all, my dad said. But he goes, you either know debits and credits, you either know how to read balance sheets, financials, and you have some tax background, or you don't. So he said, it's a profession. And if you can, get your CPA and go the whole 9 yards, because a lot of independent business owners that own their company have a CPA behind their name. Big time CEOs and CFOs and large companies often have a CPA behind their name. And he said, it's germane, like right down to your family budget even. So for lack of a better plan, I took accounting. That being said, because I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, I always knew I wanted to work for myself, but I never, even my sophomore year, imagined in a million years that I'd be working self-employed as a CPA. But that's the way it worked out. 2.5 years with Mort Compston. The partnership broke up. They thought they'd ship me off to an account payable clerk position for a trucking company or something like that. And I said, sorry, collected unemployment, and I already had the wheels in motion for H&H Management Advisory Services, Inc. We were officed in the Southgate Office Plaza off 494 and 100 in West Bloomington. And I did that up until from 84 to 88 when I got married. And then my wife and I looked at quality of life, and we moved to Duluth, Minnesota. And we found a nice little home out on Lakewood Road, 10 acres around us. At that time, 100 grand would be FHA. And we actually found a house up here. That'd buy you a 2 or 3 bedroom rambler in the cities, 30-year-old house, East Bloomington, Richfield, South Minneapolis, neighbors on top of you and airplanes overhead. And I said, for that kind of money, I'd be able to shoot a gun off my deck and run a snowmobile in my backyard, hoot and holler and have dogs barking. And so we just simply moved to Duluth for my quality of life, quality choice, and we've never looked back. This is a phenomenal community, even today, to raise a family. Education's top drawer. People are friendly, people are willing to talk to you, and it's a relaxed atmosphere. So beautiful place. And shortly after I moved up here, I got a job with a firm, a job, lasted 6 months. April 15th, they said, it's not working out. We are supposed to get a pay raise, and they let me go. So I came home with hat in hand to my wife at the time, Deb. And I said, I lost my job today, and much to her utmost respect for her, she had no idea how much it meant to me. And I didn't realize it till many years later. She actually respected me and said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't think it's any better with any other firm. I want to start my own practice. And she said, I'm 110% behind you. What I know you can do it. I know you won't be able to look yourself in the mirror if you don't try. And I knew 0 people in this town when I started, Tom. 0 people, and built this practice from ground zero, but not without a lot of help. Good people like you, working hard, and a lot of the grace of the Lord, definitely.
Jim, you started your business 38 years ago. What early on were the biggest challenges that you had as, number one, you're an entrepreneur. You're starting your own business. So this isn't purchasing a business that's existing. You're starting at grassroots, and this is your first time doing it, and then in the accounting field. So take those 4 things. What were your biggest challenges early on?
The biggest challenge coming into a community like Duluth, Minnesota, was to get connected. Luckily, I have a personality that's not typical of accountants. Most people say, Jim, I can't even believe you're a CPA or an accountant. And that's because I tell them, I said, well, I listened to my dad back in the day as I shared the story about dentistry not working out for me. And so consequently, I had to think long and hard about how to get connected. And I had a couple of good fortunes. I did hire a marketing company. They weren't all that more bright than I am, to be honest, about marketing, but they had a few good ideas. And I ended up doing some advertising in the newspaper. I had a couple of ads that really reached out to people, offering their biggest help was they said, you got to offer 25% off. In order to be able to get people to act on a coupon, 25% is the number. So we created some ads. I did most of the work on the jingle or the lead in to get people's attention. They helped fine tune it, but the 25% off was huge. And I put a coupon in the paper, and that worked tremendously. At the same time, KDL radio, I was blessed and lucky. Michael Langevin came in. He was the operations director back in the day, and I was doing taxes for him. And he looks at me and he says, you know, Hacking, he says, I'm thinking we might like to try you out on the radio. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, have you ever been on the radio? I said, no. And he says, well, you got the personality, he says, and you got the knowledge. He says, I'd like to have you come in and we'll do a little tax call-in show. And he says, you can come and share some tax information with people. We'll have people call in and we'll see how it goes. But he said, I'm going to warn you, We did this a couple of years ago with the CPA and it failed miserably. The guy couldn't talk his way out of a paper box. He was boring as all get out, and he rambled on and he talked over everybody's head. But he says, don't be scared. I think you can do it. So the first year we did 2 or 3 radio shows. I got back from them. They liked it. I did okay. And then the second year, I got a call from Lange, and he talked to actually your dad, Gunnar. And he said, yeah, Gunnar's the operations director. We're happy with hacking. And Lange says, we're so happy with you, Jim. We want to make a regularly scheduled show. And we are going to benchmark the fact we're doing it. So there's a term. I go, well, Michael, what's benchmark mean? And he goes, it means we're going to tell our listeners ahead of time, be sure and tune in at Tuesday at 9 a.m. because Jim Hacking, certified public accountant, the tax man, is going to be here to answer your questions. Well, that was huge in helping to get my name out there and to grow my business, because now I had what I would call 2 prongs of a 3-prong marketing attack that is genius. And Lange was brilliant on this. He says, you're not paying for the show. Back then when KDL was the information station, as you well know, and they were a community service provider. They wanted to have top talent, local programming. Unfortunately, over the years, they've moved away from that. It's a lot of the canned programming. We don't have the old local talents like Lou Campbell was on with the Antique Show, and Rhonda Grusendorf with some of the flowers. I think all that remains now is Jordan is great with Fishing Frenzy, and you got Bobble, and the plant dude is still around forever. But other than that, but back then it was huge. And so what ended up happening was I was on the radio, I had my ad going, and then I had done some work for customers. So now if somebody saw the ad in the paper, all of a sudden, and it takes 2 things to get people to move, I found very effectively get people to move. And when they see your ad in the paper and then they heard me on the radio, they're picking up the phone. Oh, this guy's got it. Geez, I heard him on the radio. He sounded pretty good. Or Tommy, you've always been good to me. You make a referral. Hey, Hacking's my account. Oh, you like him? I heard that dude on the radio. He is good. Now you got 2 things, or maybe it's all 3. Well, geez, you use them. Yeah, I clipped out his ad and I heard him on the radio. So they're coming in. So if you can get a 2 or 3 leg approach to your marketing program, it's just huge. And so it really put me on the map, got me in the community, and it was a challenge. It cost some money and it took some time, but it really worked out well.
Jim, back when you were on the radio show, what were some, and it was a call-in show, what were some of the questions that you would see as repeating questions over and over that your clientele was most interested in their own personal taxes?
Wow, thinking back, there was just such a wide array of questions. I mean, people would, a lot of things are like, is something deductible? A lot of questions about kids with college and what's available for college credits. You know, what itemized deductions can I take? A lot of times talking about potential tax brackets for people, what deductions mean to them. A lot of times, a lot of questions about, should I accelerate income or defer income? That's always a year-end planning issue. You know, do I want to bring more income into this year if I can, or do I want to bring in more expenses this year if I can, or do I want to wait till next year? A lot of questions about that. A lot of retirement questions, you know, IRAs. Can I do an IRA? What are some of the thresholds? But just a real array of things. I mean, back then you used to be able to take unreimbursed employee expenses. Trump eliminated that with his tax law changes. But you know, guys, a lot of guys are truckers or contractors. Can I write off my mileage? Can I write off my Carhartts, work boots, that type of stuff? That, of course, is all gone for W-2 employees under the current tax code. But just, yeah, a real wide array. Most of the questions I could field. One of the reasons the radio was so pleased is because if somebody had a really deep question, I'd say, you know what, Tom, that's too much to answer right now on the radio. Give my office a call and we'll follow up with you at no charge. And we actually did that. I mean, people would call in and I'd follow up off the radio because you're going to lose people. You know, it's like it's specialized and it's just not germane to the public. And then in the end, I would never advertise myself, but Carrie Rod or Jordan or Cadigan, they'd go, hey, where can our listeners get a hold of you, Jim? They would ask me, and I'd say 727-6887, call. There's no charge for a quick question. We're here to support the community. So our community support reached far beyond, and we even did jointly. I would do an open house every year in February. Kirk Halderson's an investment advisor that offices with us, and we would shut down for 2 days right in the first week of February and have an open house for people to come, see our offices, ask questions. We'd have free back massages. We take the stress out of the tax season was the theory. We'd have free back massages. We'd have all kinds of hors d'oeuvres, pop, some beer and wine on hand. And we'd bring in an attorney. We'd have an investment advisor and an insurance person here. So people could ask questions and stuff. And KDL was part of that, you know, through the radio. We'd have it on our flyer, you know, as a kind of a sponsor, so to speak. And they would put it out on the radio for us for free too back then and say, everybody wants to go, you know, community service. Jim's offering an open house, which went over really well in the town.
You know, you were talking about the massages when people would come in, and I was waiting for you to say that there was a beer or a whiskey there because, you know, when I leave my accountant's office, oh, geez, Jim, that is your office. There's several times I've needed a beer or a whiskey, I'll tell you. But no, Jim treats us very, very well. And one of the things that I will say is when Jim says that he will answer questions and there's no charge to it, I call Jim on folks on a regular basis. Jim's been my accountant for 30 plus years, and I can call Jim anytime. And I personally have not received an invoice, a bill from Jim, other than my annual taxes or business taxes and whatnot. So he's a straight up guy, straight up shooter, and as honest as the day is long.
Well, thanks for that, Tom. You know, I really appreciate that. And you know, the thing is with it, I mean, people are really good. Like if you call and you have a major deal, I'll tell you, like, oh, Tom, this is going to take some time to figure out. So people are like, fine, bill me accordingly. I understand. But most of the time, as you well know, we're also good friends. You know, 15-minute conversation, 10 minutes of it is how's life and what's going on. And then there's a 5-minute question. Well, you know, I hate to say it, attorneys are notorious for billing you for every minute. And we all kind of chuckle about that one. I just can't do it. You know, I'm like, it's part of the deal. We're here I would rather answer a question and keep people moving along in the right direction. I'm in it for the long run. It's not about the money. And I was very blessed just the other night. After I got done with the board meeting, I had my new tax manager, Brady Evanson, with me. We went up to the bar, and Sandy and Natalie Hoff were there. And, you know, they own FI Salter, and they're quite involved with real estate and Pier B and everything. And out of nowhere, I never felt so good. Sandy looked at young Brady, who's my new corporate tax manager, and he literally, unprovoked or anything, he said, you know, he says, I've been with Jim for quite a while now, and I can tell you one thing, Jim really cares about his customers, and you just don't find that very often anymore. And he has been with a number of firms, including RSM McGladrey, where I recruited Brady from. And he said, I've been through a number of CPAs, and Jim is the one guy I found that, you know, works really hard, but he really cares. And that felt really good. That's what we're about. We're not in it for the money. We're in it to make a difference in people's lives.
Jim, and you know, taxes for most people are a very scary thing. They're something that we feel very inept about. We may be experts in our own areas of business or areas of life, but when it comes to taxes, most of us feel inept, and we get quite fearful of, boy, am I going to make a mistake? Am I going to do something wrong? And I can tell you folks, when you deal with a person like Jim Hacking, we're going to get to some more questions here. But when you deal with somebody like Jim Hacking, you will trust Jim to the point where when you get audited like I have several times, and you just turn the power of attorney over to Jim and he calls you back a half an hour later and says, hey, everything's taken care of. In fact, you're getting an extra $128 back this year.
Well,
and
it doesn't always work out that way.
No, but that has happened to me once, folks. And Jim called me back and said, you're getting $128, not 29, but I was getting 128 back. And the comfort we have in dealing with somebody that we trust is very important, especially when it comes to our income taxes and our annual taxes.
Can I segue off that, Tom? I got an important comment to make that flows kind of right into that. And I just want to put this out there for your listeners, because as the years have gone by and what I'm seeing, I am a little bit saddened about my profession. And there's something very important for consumers of our services to know. And that is when it comes to the tax world, and Tom, you're going to be able to segue in on this when I talk about this, because I remember vividly a situation we had with you years ago, and you were just elated. But first of all, there's two distinct parts to tax preparation. One is taking all your information that you give us, whether it's in a garbage sack, hopefully not. People are much better now. We don't really want your receipts. We just want final numbers. Here's my total cash contributions. Here's my total non-cash. Here's my office expenses if you have a business. Here's my total advertising. Less receipts. You keep your receipts. But getting everything onto the return and prepared onto the return is one piece. And no matter who you are, your brain, when you're going through people's stuff and doing data entry, that's what you're doing. And it's very difficult to think about much else. You're doing data entry. I'm taking your W-2 and I'm putting it into my system. Okay. And H&R Block does a lot of that. If you're going to a tax preparer where they do your tax return in front of you, that's the level of service you're going to get. You're not necessarily going to get ideas. They're not necessarily going to catch mistakes or be able to rework something or come up with a better plan, because you're sitting in front of them. Give me your W-2, give me your 1099 interest, and they're plunking it on your tax return. And they're not thinking about the results, nor do they even have the end result. They're on the 40-yard line and they're moving towards the other goal line on a football field bit by bit, trying to get a touchdown called. I've got all your stuff on the tax return. So that's one piece of it. And sadly, in my CPA world, there's way too many of us professionals that are not doing the other piece that's the most critical, particularly if you're going to a professional firm such as a CPA firm, and that is seeing the customer. We see all of our customers. I have an exit interview with everyone who will come in. COVID was a little difficult for me. I was kicking and screaming because I'm a little older and technology sort of, I'm ready to retire. I don't need any more technology. But the cool part of it was Zoom. And I have a lot of customers who've retired and they moved to Florida. They moved to Arizona, just like you and I right now, Tom, or just like we're sitting here in the same office. We can see each other. We're talking. I can bring up a 2-year comparison and you can be anywhere in the country or the world. I have a customer in China that I had a Zoom appointment with here this last tax season. It's fantastic. The key is I at least see or have a Zoom or a phone conversation with a finished product in front of me. And I know years ago, you and I were going through your return. I engage you into your return. This is your information. I'm taking it. And I'll never forget, without divulging numbers, your mortgage interest was up in this particular year and you were getting money back and you were happy. You're like, oh my God, I've never gotten money back. And your mortgage interest was higher than it was a year ago. And then I'm going through and looking, And I noticed that, well, what about, like, I'll just say, what about US Bank though? You had US Bank out there last year. Did you get rid of that? And you go, oh my gosh, no. Or yeah, I switched banks, and you went and you found another, what, $15,000, $20,000, something wild number, whatever it is, of interest. And we put that on your tax return, and you were like, Jim, thank you so much. We never would have discovered this. I failed to give it to you, Jim. You literally said, I failed to give it to you. I never would have thought about it if you didn't take the time to sit down and go through this with me. And then you had the sense to ask me about it. So everything was good. And that's the important thing. I tell you, people are leaving tens of thousands of dollars on the table if they're not sitting down with a professional discussing their taxes with what I call a 95% complete tax return.
And folks, I will tell you that is critically important. I know it is for me. I know it is for my family, that I have gotten the relationship built with Jim, but Jim makes it a point of his business to build that relationship where we have a Q&A 2 hours over my personal tax returns. And Jim will ask me on every line item as he goes through it, do you understand this? Do you agree with this? Does this make sense to you? And that's how you unearth these nuggets that are out there that the tax laws say, yes, you can take that, or no, you cannot take that. And I asked Jim a lot of questions, folks, where he's like, no, Tom, you cannot do that. I wouldn't know that if I didn't go to a professional like you, Jim.
And it's even reached into, I remember one year too, Tommy, you had a K1. I didn't prepare the K1 from a flow through company, had nothing to do with it, but I'm looking at it, scratching my head, and I go, hey, don't you guys do this? It had something to do with some domestic production credit or something. And you went, well, yeah. And I go, there's nothing on it. And you had to go back to your people and their accountant, and you got a corrected K1 that saved you money just by me looking at something that was prepared by somebody else, not required of me, not even in the realm of necessarily what I'm doing, but because I was paying attention and kind of looking at it and then thinking about it. And then suddenly I came up with a deduction that wasn't my responsibility or yours, but was the responsibility of another firm for a business you were involved with. And you got a corrected K1 and you got a bunch of money back. And I think we even amended a year or two. As a result, it was missed for a couple of years.
You are correct. Folks, we're going to switch gears just a slight bit here. We're not going to talk about my taxes anymore.
Well, they're good examples, though. It just happened to work out.
They're beautiful examples, and that's why I give your name out to everybody I know, Jim. But what would you say for the general population out there on what do they need to be doing to prepare for their taxes?
Well, the big thing this year, and so far it's gone really relatively well, is be sure and get your letters. And I believe the government's done a relatively good job of what we've seen so far. Did you get your economic stimulus checks last year? $1,400 per head. That was for husband, wife each, and your kid. And even if you were taking a college kid under age 24 as a dependent, you should have gotten $1,400 a head. So make sure that you have your letters, or you go back and look. And then if you didn't qualify for some reason, make sure you notate that to your accountant so they can look to see if you do qualify on your 2021 return. So those economic stimulus checks were designed to get them in your hands early. It's an actual tax credit that exists on your 2021 tax return. And if you didn't get all the money, you may qualify when they do your 2021 return, and you'll get the refund then. If for some reason you got those checks and then in 2021 your income was too high and you don't qualify, you do not have to pay it back. So it's money from heaven on stimulus checks. But there's another one that came out that's caused some consternation for people, and it's called the Early Child Tax Credit Advance. And starting in July, people were beginning to get $300 a month for a kid put in to their checking account automatically. Now, this was the craziest thing I've ever seen, because they just did it. You actually had to, with some consternation, go online and opt out of this. If you didn't want the money coming in, which we recommended to our customers, do not take the money early. Wait and see when we do your tax return. Nobody ever complains about getting $3,000 extra back as a tax credit that's refundable. But that particular credit, if you got money early and your income for some reason was too high in 2021, you would have to pay it back. So that one wasn't as good of an answer. So far, I haven't had anybody have to pay it back. A lot of people did call and tell them, shut this thing off. I don't want it. But they are sending out letters. And what they're doing is they're splitting it between husband and wife. So when you get your economic stimulus letter, it may say 1,400, and then they'll give your kids, they'll split your kids' economic stimulus, 700. So they'll look at 2,100 each. That's the economic stimulus. And then they're splitting the child credit between husband and wife. So if you got $1,500 in advance, 5 months of 300 on one kid, a husband will get a $750 and the wife will get a $750. That means you got $1,500 up front. The credit might be $3,000 and you'll get the other $1,500 refunded on your tax return. So make sure you have that information all dialed in. Last year, we had a heck of a headache. You wouldn't believe how many people couldn't remember whether they got $1,200 or $600 stimulus checks. And they were not sending out letters regularly to people. And so we were pulling our hair out. People were saying, I don't think I got it. I can't remember. They're going back to look in their bank account. And they sent it out 3 different ways: direct deposit, check in the mail, or I actually had a retired couple. They got a couple debit cards in the mail. They thought it was junk and shredded it. Good news is, after months of fighting with the IRS, they issued them a couple more debit cards. But they were retired. They had no idea. You would never think the government would send you a Visa card for $600, but that's how crazy things were.
And obviously, have your W-2s.
Oh, yeah.
Have your health insurance information.
Yep.
What
and
other
1099
things?
interest. 1099s, just so people understand, W-2s and stuff, everything should basically be out by the end of January. But if you're with Raymond James or Merrill Lynch or Charles Schwab and you got some investments, that stuff is supposed to be out by the middle of February. And then talk to your broker and make sure there's not a corrected statement coming. Corrected statements tend to come out in the first half of March. So they try to push this stuff out. Everybody goes, well, I didn't realize. I thought all 1099s had to be the end of January. Well, a few years back, they realized that there were so many corrected statements that they did push it out for the investment accounts to February 15th. So make sure you have your 1099s. And another thing is, I'm hearing from people is, if you have an HSA account, like I have one with Optin Bank, I don't get a statement in the mail from them anymore. You have to go online and pull off the report that shows what you contributed, and most importantly, a 1099 SA that shows what you took out for distributions. So you need to put that into your tax return. If people have 529 plans, to get the 1099 Qs, sometimes you have to go online to get that. It may not be just directly mailed to you, to be aware of that one. And another one
that's the college investment plan.
Yep, that's the college investment. What did we take out of a 529 plan? Because you have to reconcile that and show that you spent that money out of a 529 plan. And another one that routinely comes up, other than the 1099 Qs, is to be sure and like I said, ask your broker if there's going to be any corrected 1099s coming out. So hopefully you're just doing it once. And after your return is done, then, 2 weeks later, you got this corrected. And now it's like, do I have to amend my return because they changed something by 25 cents on a corrected 1099? So you want to be sure to be aware of that as well. So the HSA accounts, also, like I said, you got to go on for those.
Which are health savings accounts.
That's health savings accounts. Yep. Generally, you got to go online to get those. Oh, and then you got your college kid. 1098T tuition statements. The parents may be paying college. They're not getting that statement directly. You have to have your son or daughter go online to the University of Minnesota or LSC, Lake Superior College, go online and print out that 1098T that indicates what the tuition was and what they got for grants and scholarships. And don't forget to add to that, because generally 1098Ts do not include books. So books are part of the equation as to whether you qualify for any education credit, such as American Opportunity or Lifetime Learning Credit. Very important. So those are just a few things to be aware of as taxpayers out there. And then really critical planning point is dealing with your college children. If your kid is 18 and older and not in school at any part of the year, and they make over like $4,000, you can't claim them anymore. In other words, all of 21, my kid wasn't in school, had a decent job, mom and dad can't claim them. The flip side of that is your kid could be making $40,000 a year and in college and under age 24, mom and dad could still technically claim them. If they're a full-time student and under age 24, mom and dad can still claim them. So there's tremendous planning opportunities around college kids. Do not let your kid go off half-cocked. They worked at McDonald's, made their $6,000 and had $25 of federal withholding, and file their own tax return to get their $100 back and screw you up on your taxes. Just say, time out, we need to talk to our accountant. And what's really wild is last year and this year, we may want to cut some kids loose. There's an economic stimulus check sitting out there. And if a kid made enough money and parents aren't really benefiting on their return, it might make sense to cut that kid loose, and they're going to pick up a $1,400 stimulus check, and it makes no difference to mom and dad on their taxes. So there's just the key takeaway is kids in college, you should probably be talking to an advisor who knows taxation and look at the balance between the kid's income, what the tuition is, what the parents have going on, and who qualifies for what, and which way is the best way to go. Very important. Lots of dollars are lost if you're going to H&R Block and just getting your return done and not addressing children and what they're doing and their filing requirements. Hate to say it, but that requires face-to-face conversation. And I usually have to rephrase the question 2 or 3 times to get the correct answer out of the client. I mean, so they understand what I'm talking about. It's not an easy question to ask because they're like, well, they didn't go to school, or, oh, wait, well, no, they graduated from high school. Well, that counts as full time. If your kid had jettisons out of East on May 5th or June 1st or whatever, then they didn't go to school, you still can claim them that year. Even if they made $30,000 the second half of the year, you can still claim them. Whether it makes sense or not, you need to have a discussion.
Tell us about the continuing education courses that you and your staff have to take every year to keep up on all these tax laws.
Well, we have to take 40 hours a year as CPAs. That's required. And in our firm, it's mostly all in taxation, very different areas. Sometimes we're into estate or trusts, individual taxation, corporate taxation. And then, of course, CPAs, apparently somehow there was questions of whether we're ethical or not. Maybe that goes back to the days of Arthur Anderson and company, but every 3 years we're required to have 8 hours of ethics to make sure that we know what's ethical. So that's good. And that has to be part of that 120 hours every 3 years. You have to have 8 hours of ethics as a CPA. So we are held to high standards and high rigors to keep up in what we practice in. And that also goes to, like, people are in auditing and doing financial statements, 40 hours in anything that's public accounting related. But for our practice, because we're a small business consulting and individual and business tax practice, the bulk of ours is in taxation. So we're really on top of taxes.
Jim, a lot of people have 401ks. I know you can't give investment advice, but
Correct.
from a tax standpoint, what advice can you give to people on investing in their 401ks, on how that can help them from taxation?
That's a great question, Tom, and I'm really glad you asked it. And I'm having a lot of fatherly, if you will, conversations with the 20-somethings that come into us. And I get on my soapbox a little bit. But first off, just in principle, I would tell every listener out there, minimally, you should try to put 10% of your paycheck away into a 401k plan or 403b plan if you're at the hospital. That should be a principle that everybody has that's not negotiable. The reason for this is because it is so hard to save. And I call it saving to save. You're taking 10% off the top. It comes out of your check. The power is in it's out of sight, out of mind. Now, if you can do more, great. But at least do the 10% off the top because it's just so important. And otherwise, it never gets done. I told you when I moved up here, I was out of work. The mother of my children had the opportunity to get into the plan at St. Luke's in the first year. And I said, baby, what can you put away? She said 15%. She fell out of her chair. Her eyes rolled around the back of her head. She said, Jim, we're robbing Paul to pay Peter. We're not able to, make ends meet. You got very little money coming in. And I said, sweetie, if you don't do it, it'll never get done. I said, we got to take it off the top. Don't go into it. Don't touch it till 59 and a half. Leave it alone. And then the rest, I call it budgeting 101 made easy. That's off the top. What are you going to do next? You're going to make your house payment. You're going to make your car payment. You want to keep the lights on, and you're going to put some food in your belly. When you get down to discretionary dollars in entertainment, you can say, well, we don't have it, or we can eat macaroni and cheese and go to the movies, or we can get another job, or we can ask the boss for a raise, or I'm going to start a side business. But you're not sitting here paying for everything. And I'll tell you, every time when I was younger, and I see it with people across the board, you feel like you got a cool extra 5 hundos in your pocket. And the minute you think that, you get a phone call from headquarters saying, honey, the refrigerator broke. And there went that $500. So if you're trying to spend first and save second, it won't happen. As far as what to go in, if you're in the 10 or 12% bracket, tax-wise, you need to know what tax bracket you're in. No brainer. Absolutely do the Roth component of a 401k or 403b plan. That means you're not taking a tax deduction today, and future earnings are tax-free. Everybody likes the sound of tax-free. The Roth is the best thing since sliced bread. I love it. As you move into the 22% bracket, the next bracket, it's a 10% jump. I would still look at least a 50-50 balance. Maybe you take half of your money and put it into the pre-tax, so you're harvesting a deduction for it today, and the other half into after-tax, the Roth. I love diversification of tax buckets. At the end of retirement, wouldn't it be nice to have a bucket that's tax-free? I can pull the money out if and when I want to. There are no required minimum distribution requirements. You can pass it to your kids income tax-free. It's got a lot of bells and whistles for giving up a 10 or 12% deduction today. The pre-tax, you get the deduction today, but it's all taxable when you pull it out. And if you pull it out early, there's a 10% penalty to boot. Now, COVID waived some of that. We had a lot of strategizing with people pulling out of some IRA money because they wanted to clean up some debt. And due to COVID, you didn't have to pay the 10% penalty, but you still paid federal and state tax, and you're still eroding your saving to save pot for retirement. But sometimes your back is against the wall and you have to make some maneuvers you didn't expect. So lots of planning opportunities as it involves these types of vehicles. But the most important is to put away something, and whether you know it or not, you're putting away a little each paycheck. If you get paid, 26 checks a month, you get paid every 2 weeks, whether you get paid twice a month or weekly, you're always putting a little bit in, so you're getting true dollar cost averaging. And what that means to people is, today the market's at a high. You might say, well, I don't want to jump in now. I'm expecting a crash. Well, if you've got 10, 15, 20, 30 years till retirement, go in now. Yeah, the next time the market went down a little, you're buying in again with another contribution. Every check you're putting in a contribution. So you're constantly buying high and low at little increments, but over the long run, you're going to have a trajectory that you should be able to realize a 10 to 13% return on your money in the long run. So you don't have to watch the market too closely as you're putting in X amount per paycheck. But then that being said, taxpayers that are in their later 50s, you better be looking at that really hard right now and determining what your asset mix is. I'm not an investment advisor, but the market's at an all-time high, and we have a lot of stuff going on, not just in our country, but in the world, and we're becoming more and more of a world economy that this market could tank. And if you don't think so, just go back to 2008. I can't tell you how many people in their late 50s and early 60s were across my desk and go, you know, I'm thinking about pulling the plug pretty soon. I got a cool $500,000, a cool mill put away. My account's looking good. Boom, boom, boom. And overnight, damn near, the market tanked 40%. And I can tell you, and anybody that's been through it will verify this with you, it took all the way till 2016 before those people, needless to say, lost 40%. They weren't paying attention to their 401k or 403b. They weren't paying attention to the asset mix. They got a pile of money in there because they did the right thing since they were young, but 40% disappeared. That combined with needing to pick up the health insurance bill till you can get on Medicare. They didn't retire. In 2016, some of these same people came back and said, my account value is now back to where it was in 2008 with me continuing to work and contribute. So their account had not fully market recovered till probably 2018. And then, of course, when we had Trump come in the office, Obama, Trump transition, the market was at 19,000 in the Dow. Now we're up around 35. And then don't get smug, because if you remember a year ago, that market overnight damn near tanked down to 19,000. What nobody saw was an immediate vector back up. But it kind of indicates stability isn't real great and you're close to retirement. You need to review your asset mix and how much risk do you want to take and how much risk you have out there. Really need to emphasize that. Super important for people that are approaching retirement.
Jim, great advice. Let's talk. A lot of people want to be entrepreneurs like yourself. And somebody has a great idea. They have a small business that's more of a hobby, and they want to turn this into an actual business. We have all of these categories we can do. We can be a sole proprietor. We can form an LLC. We can form an S corporation. We can form a C corporation. For somebody small and starting out and starting to build, from a tax liability standpoint, Jim, what do you recommend people look at and start with? Because you have, 4 options here that I just rattled off that can be very confusing.
Absolutely. They're not only very confusing, but they have very different outcomes. For most very small people, if you're testing the waters, you're not necessarily sure if you're all in. The LLC is fantastic. First of all, most people start out as what's called a sole proprietor, and you file a Schedule C, which is part of your personal tax return. I like the acronym KISS, keep it simple, stupid. I don't anticipate payroll. I may not even have to collect sales tax. I'm going to do a little carpentry work on the side. I'm going to do, some lawn mowing or whatever it is you're going to do. You can file a Schedule C, keep track of your income, your expenses, net profit or loss is part of your personal return through a Schedule C. Now, do I want some corporate liability protection? There's never any substitute for good insurance. So when you start your own business, you always should have a conversation with your insurance man out there to make sure that you have proper coverage for what it is you're doing. And whether you're operating out of your home or you're renting some space somewhere to do something, If you're in the professional world, we have what's called errors and omissions assurance for realtors and CPAs and attorneys. For doctors, they have what's called malpractice insurance. So there's all kinds of insurances. And then the slip and fall, I got a rental property, somebody slips and falls. The LLC is an easy 5-question thing you can do online. I recommend to everybody, if you're going to incorporate, it's not a bad idea to hire an attorney to help you with it, because I'm thinking more in the future, if things change and you want to bring in another owner or partner, to have an attorney on board that has business law experience is a valuable asset. As you start your own business, you need to build your own board of directors, professional team. It should consist of a good insurance person. You need a good banker that understands small business banking. You want to have a good accountant on board with you. And you want to have a good attorney on board with you. And then maybe even an investment advisor as well, as you start to accumulate money and maybe you can put away. So you need a team of people, trusted advisors that can help guide and mentor you as your business grows. But an LLC is very simple. You can do it yourself. And then you have legal liability protection, assuming you don't commingle personal funds with business funds like a lot of small operators do. Again, you file a Schedule C sole proprietor. Partnerships are definitely I'm going to give you a couple broad brush things, very broad. Partnerships are great for real estate deals. You want to be taxed as a partnership, you can form an LLC, but if you have 2 or more members, by default, you would file a partnership tax return as an LLC. And so for taxes, you file Form 1065. Partnerships give a lot of flexibility in profit and loss sharing and in ownership percentages. You can change things around, and I'll just leave it that they work great for real estate. If you have an ordinary trade or business where we're going to have bottom line profit from our work, and we're either selling widgets or we're manufacturing or we're providing services, generally my entity of choice, if we can pay ourselves and have profit left over, would be an S corporation. The S corp works great for an ordinary trade or business. And when you're a small business starting up, at first, you might have a loss in the first year. Single member LLC, we're on a Schedule C. We take a loss for a year or two, we're building it up. All of a sudden, we start hitting 30,000 a profit. Now you're starting to hit what might be a reasonable salary. We start talking about, we can always switch an LLC to be taxed as an S corp later. So the LLC gives you the ability to make an S election later. The advantage of the S election is, and when I would make it immediately for a business starting, is if somebody came into me, Tom, Joe comes in and says, Jim, I'm starting this business. After I write off everything I can think of, including the kitchen sink, I'm going to have $100,000 left over. How do I best take it? I would say, let's go S corp right out of the box. We're going to set you up. You need to take a reasonable salary. Maybe we dial your salary in at $40,000. Then we have 60,000 of profit flow through. That 60 grand of profit, which you could take out as shareholder distributions, is taxed at federal and state rates, but not self-employment tax. If we leave the whole 100 grand in the single member LLC, we're going to pay 15.3% self-employment tax on top of that federal and state tax. So there's an opportunity to save some FICA taxes, but you have to have reasonable compensation. And of course, you have your corporate veil protection. You can bring in another shareholder, but everything's relegated in a S corp by shareholder percentage. You can't have unequal profit and loss sharing percentages like you can in a partnership. If we're 50-50 and I'm going to take out a shareholder distribution, Tom, for 10 grand, I got to give you 10 grand too. In a partnership, I could take out 10 grand and give you nothing, and that's okay, depending on how the partnership is set up. So those are some broad brush. C corps are kind of a dinosaur. Really don't have very many C corps left anymore. Everything's passed through entity. That's not to say that a C corp might not work out well for someone. And also because of the fact that the top rate is 21%, Although the Build Back Better bill that was presented by Biden, they were trying to raise that up to 25%. When would you want to be a C Corp? If you were a manufacturing company, you were going into, say, manufacturing would be a great example. We're equipment intensive, we're inventory intensive. We don't need every dime out of the company. We're not taking out every dime. As a matter of fact, we want to plow money back into the company and be debt free and have a pile of inventory and equipment that's bought and paid for. A C Corp might work well. Owners can pull out a salary. They leave the rest of the money in, and if the owner brackets are above 21%, which could be a 22% or higher, it might make sense to leave the money in the C Corp and pay at the corporate level. So a C Corp pays at the corporate level, but the only way you can get money out is salary. If you take out a dividend like you do in an S Corp, it's double taxation. Dividends are not deductible to the company and their income to you. For example, a lot of people own Elite, formerly Minnesota Power stock, and they love those dividend statements. Well, you pay taxes as an individual on the dividend, and that company does not deduct that dividend.
Perfect, Jim. Hey, we're going to briefly switch gears here. We're going to go personal on you. This has been amazing information. Our listeners, you just got an education for free here in the last hour. But Jim, a couple quick questions on our packed question segment. This is all about you. Your favorite activity or hobby outside of work?
I gotta say right now in the winter, it's been snowmobiling. We had the opportunity to do some serious deep powder snowmobiling last Saturday. Of course, I'm old, so I'm sitting behind letting everybody else go through the waist deep snow. But it was super fun to watch my son and my future son-in-law on a couple of mountain sleds, literally ripping up Brimson in 6 feet of snow. Just unbelievable. I mean, and flying through the snow. I do love snowmobiling a lot. It's great to get out and enjoy the winter activity.
And Jim, what is your favorite band?
Wow, one of my favorite bands is kind of old time, but still relevant today, and the young kids even are catching on. I would have to say Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. And when you say band, they are truly that. There's not smoke and mirrors. There's not a whole bunch of flashy stuff and half naked dancing going on. The boss comes out with Miami Steve, Clarence Clemens' son or whatever on the sax, and they just blow you away for 3.5 hours. It's not an hour and a half concert. It's a workout, and it's 3.5 hours of old time. I mean, the songs are amazing. And what's really cool is the boss is still relevant today. So definitely I would have to say Springsteen and the E Street Band, favorite band. I have many others, but that one is one of the top, and I've gotten to see him a number of times in concert.
Well, you're a pretty blessed guy. And the last pack question is, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
I think one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received is to always be true. Be true to yourself, be true to others, which means be honest and be trustworthy. If you keep your integrity, that's all you have. In reality, you can talk about money and property and houses and everything else, all the material goods in the world. But as you and I well know, Tom, we unfortunately at that age where we've had a chance to be at a funeral or two, and nobody talks about that stuff. They talk about what manner of person were you. And if you're an integrous person, you're kind, you're true to yourself, you're true to others, that's the best advice I got. And you can sleep at night. You know, piddling around and penny ante stuff, it's just not worth it. You know, be honest, be straightforward, be the type of person that your handshake means something, be the type of person that your word means something.
Jim, we all thank you so much for being here. Our special guest today has been Jim Hacking, the owner of James Hacking and Associates CPA. He has given us one heck of an education. Jim, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on board, Tom. And if any of your listeners should have a follow-up question, there's no charge for them to give me a call too. I've done a lot of free advice to people. I'm happy to sit down and see what they got going on. If you do your own, I've been able to help some people and tell them, please keep doing your own. You know where I'm at. Come and see me again.
And how do they find you?
They can call us at 218-727-6887. And quite simply, we're located on the 5th floor of the Selwood building. Western Bank is on our ground floor. We're on the 5th floor of where Western Bank is on 2nd Avenue West and Superior Street. 5th floor and a hall, you're there.
Jim, thanks so much. And folks, until next time, unplug from the indoors and recharge in the outdoors. The outdoors, the outdoors, the outdoors, the outdoors. Hey, everybody, this is Tom Sega from Duluth Pack, and this is the Duluth Pack podcast, Leader of the Pack. Our special guest today is Jim Vinosky, Forbes contributor and host of Manufacturing Talks podcast. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here. Great to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And Jim has really become a friend of ours, and we've gotten to know him over the last couple of years. And so this will be a lot of fun today because, you know, when you know somebody and you know their passions, it sure makes this easy and makes it a heck of a lot of fun. So, Jim, let's start at the beginning. You obviously worked 30 years in industry. We're going to talk all about that. But tell us a little about Jim Vinosky, where you grew up, went to school, all of those great things.
Sure thing. Yeah. So where I grew up is not far from where you are now, 100 miles away in Ironwood, Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula, right there on the border of Wisconsin. So, yeah, the house I grew up in was like a mile from the Wisconsin border. A lot of people don't even realize that's part of Michigan up there, as not as close to the lake as you are, about 18 miles off Lake Superior and, you know, out in the boonies. So
Youpers.
I was a Youper. My dad worked in the forest industry. He was with the U.S. Forest Service his whole career. So we were out in the outdoors all the time and doing all the fun stuff up there in the Michigan wilds.
So all the people that are listening, tell people in that part of the world how much snow you actually do get, because you're in the snow belt of the Great Lakes, right. And I mean, beautiful skiing area, beautiful snowmobiling area, beautiful snowshoeing area for people who absolutely love winter. Tell people how much snow you actually get, because it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and it was even more mind-boggling when I was growing up. The winters were a little tougher. It was an average of 200 inches a year there in Ironwood. And, you know, the snow would start falling typically in October. It would definitely be, you know, everyone was praying for it to be on the ground thick by Thanksgiving, so the ski hills would do well early in the season. And then, you know, my birthday is April 24th, and there's many birthdays I remember there still being snow on the ground.
That's crazy, because people who aren't used to the snow, and we have people who listen to the podcast from areas where they get no snow. Right. We're talking about up to 17 feet of snow a year. Yep. And tunnels, I mean, literal tunnels where people are snow blowing out of the house, and you'll see where they'll put plywood over it so they don't have to snow blow the sidewalks anymore once it gets above their heads. Yeah. We're talking about large snowbanks and really cool country and beautifully white, all just pristine white all winter.
It's a great place if you like winter, if you like winter sports, which I did. Interestingly, I was never a skier, and that's one of the premier kind of Midwestern ski areas. But I did cross-country skiing, snowshoeing. We'd do hikes in the winter. We got our own Christmas tree. So, yeah, the winter wonderland for sure.
Oh, it's great stuff.
Yep.
So you went to school there. Then tell us about college.
Yeah. So that's an interesting story too, because I went to college in Memphis, Tennessee. So to give you the quick background there, when I went to grade school and high school, it was at Ironwood Catholic schools, which, as you might imagine, in a small remote town, the Catholic schools not real big. I think my graduating class in high school was 19, if I remember correctly.
I'm assuming you knew everybody in your graduating class.
I did, yes. And so the priest of our parish was also the guidance counselor for our school, and he had grown up with a guy in the Twin Cities who became Brother Theodore Drummond, president of Christian Brothers University in Memphis. And so knowing that, we were in this small school in a small town, it was actually my next older brother before me. He was going into electrical engineering, and this priest knew the school down in Memphis, knew it had a good engineering program. So he said, look, it's a small school. It gets you somewhere different. So you get to experience some different things, but it keeps you in a small setting. So it's not so overwhelming like if you went to, Michigan State or something like that. And so my brother looked at it, liked it. He went down there 2 years later, kind of the same talk with me, and I was going into mechanical engineering. So off to Memphis I went.
Wow. Big change for winter down
Very,
there.
right.
Well, even probably a bigger change in the summer for you.
So that's the truth.
So you went into engineering.
Yep.
You graduate college. What's next?
Yeah. So I went into engineering in part because I had already gotten into serious bicycling when I was, I think I started in my early teens. Now up there was no racing. I was really the only one who knew about such things in Ironwood at the time, but I got into, some high-end bicycles, and being not from a wealthy background, got into also doing all my own maintenance and things like that. Really took a liking to the mechanical end of things. That's actually part of why I went into mechanical engineering. And it's what I was thinking is, getting into something like that coming out. As I went through school, then I realized, manufacturing is this huge place with all kinds of cool things going on. So when I graduated, I just interviewed with all the companies that I could find that were kind of down in the area. I wound up going into chemicals for my first job. So I went down farther south into rural Mississippi and went to work for a chemical company down there.
Really? So what were you doing for them?
Project engineer. And so it was installing new capital projects, whether it's new equipment or additions to existing equipment. And, this was a big place with outdoor reaction units, stuff I'd never even imagined before in my life, making PVC. And so it's this reactive process in these big, huge batch reactors with big, huge pumps and heat exchangers and all these control systems that ran them. And so just learning that whole, chemical industrial world, it was definitely a continuation of the schooling. Let's put it that way.
Sure, I bet you that was quite the learning curve. So,
oh, yeah.
so I know you were in the plastic, and then you were also in paint industry. Was this with the same company then, or different division because of chemicals, or?
It wasn't. I wound up working in chemicals for 4 years. Even though I was from a rural background myself, I really, having had that time in Memphis, wanted to go and have a little more opportunity for, some active lifestyle, and wound up moving back to Memphis and went to work for paints and coatings company just outside Memphis.
And so you were back in Memphis, and how long were you doing that?
Not very long. They brought me on also to do projects, and it was kind of built around this new system that they intended to install, pretty high dollar project. Not long after I got there, the project was canceled because they were owned by a company called Kodak. They got into some money trouble, and so the capital went away. I did some smaller things for about 1.5 years, but just wasn't the challenge I was looking for. So went to another Memphis company, and that's really where I started more into the food end of things. It was a food ingredients company.
So who was that?
It's called Protein Technologies. It was part of Ralston Purina at the time.
Okay. And so you were in the ingredient part of the food industry?
Yeah. So we did soy protein.
Okay.
Processed soybean flour basically, and extracted the protein and made this purified series of purified protein powders for food and beverage.
And then this was sold to multiple industries. How does that work then?
Yeah, so it was any food company that was formulating with that soy protein, we would be a supplier to them.
Give us an idea of what kind of foodstuffs would take a soy protein like that.
So it could be anything from baby food to meat substitutes to energy drinks, protein drinks.
And how long were you involved in doing that?
About 4 years there too.
Okay. And now the one that really intrigues me is bourbon.
Yeah. Well, that was a lot of years later. That was actually my role previous to what I'm doing now. And I spent a good number of years in between at General Mills. That's about half my career. Okay. And so I jumped from food ingredients to food and beverage proper, kind of split my time. And it was almost 16 years with General Mills, about evenly split between Yoplait yogurt and then Big G cereals.
Okay, big Midwestern company.
Oh yeah, yep. And in fact, my first role with them was back up in Michigan, not too far from where I live now, yogurt plant in Reed City, Michigan. So almost like going home, even though it's quite a distance from where I live there to where I grew up.
Sure.
But
and then you had this bourbon thing. I'm interested in this.
So I worked my way up through the ranks at General Mills and reached a point where wanted something more and wasn't getting it, and decided to do something different and started casting the net. I mentioned that first role in Reed City, Michigan. One of my best friends that I kept up with, even though we parted ways fairly quickly within the first couple of years I was with the company, he went one direction and I went in another. But he had left the company a few years before and was one of the executives at this alcohol company that is actually headquartered in Atchison, Kansas, that had just bought a huge former Seagram's plant in Southeast Indiana, right outside Cincinnati, and knew he wanted someone to come in and run that for him. So he knew I was looking, and he gave me a call one day and said, "Why don't you meet me down in Cincinnati and we'll go take a look at this place and see if you want to run it." And I did, and one thing led to another, and off I went to make bourbon.
So tell us about making bourbon. I selfishly am just interested in what goes into making bourbon.
Yeah, so fortunately, while I had no experience in the alcohol world, professionally, I was a home brewer for a few years, right around the time I moved to Memphis. And that's how you start. Obviously beer, you're using primarily barley, but to make bourbon, you're using corn. And so you ferment a corn mixture and you get, it's beer. It's not any beer you'd want to drink by itself, but you're making a beer, and then you put that through distillation processes to purify, pull out the alcohol, and then you put the alcohol in these particular barrels, very specific, has to be a white oak barrel, charred. And then you store the barrel in a warehouse for several years, 5, 6, however many years you want to age the bourbon, and
and then you bottle it.
Yep.
Yeah. So do you have a favorite bourbon now that you made it?
I don't. It's funny. As I said, I was a beer drinker, and I think the main thing I learned being in the bourbon industry is I have no business drinking bourbon. I did get to enjoy more bourbons than I could possibly name. If I was to throw out my favorite, actually one of my favorites was one that company made. Now the company I worked for at the time had no brands of its own. It was also a contract producer. And one of the businesses at that time that they were supporting was Bullet. So we made Bullet Rye, and that was absolutely one of my favorites.
No kidding. Yep. So, in making bourbon, and what I've learned in just talking to people over the years, that's a long time. If you're aging something 3 years, 5 years, 6, 8 years, before you make your money back, there's a long time. So
that's right.
And a lot of those distilleries also made some clear liquors for the fact that those they can make and sell right away, and they could, turn some profits so they could, survive into the 5, 6, 8 years of the aging process of some of the brown, brown alcohol. Did you guys only make brown?
So no, that's really interesting. What you said is exactly right. And a lot of your craft brewers will make a vodka or a gin for that immediate return. Great way to approach the business while you're kind of funding your bourbon making as well. This place did that as well, but the reason for that was because it was a site for Seagram's that made all the components for Seagram's 7 Crown, which includes white ingredients. So basically pure grain alcohol. And so it was set up to make that variety of products. And then after Seagram's went kaput, it was owned by several different companies that then made, instead of making those for a single product, split them out, and they were different products that they sold to other companies, as a vodka, introduced the gin making and then the bourbon separately.
A way to keep cash flow going and keep your business thriving while you're waiting for obviously for the aged brown to do its thing.
Yep, exactly.
So, Jim, one of the big key words in any industry, and you obviously in being a contributor to Forbes and a writer and having a podcast on industry now, is we're all hearing about supply chain. And I know you and I had a conversation about that recently. Mm-hmm. And for those that don't know, can you give us an overview on how the supply chain differences can be from one industry to another, and how you had to deal with some of that during your career, whether it was in the chemical industry, in the paint industry, the food industry, mm-hmm. the ingredient industry, the finished food industry, or the alcohol industry? Yeah.
Supply chain is sometimes a good term, but it kind of implies this linear path. And I prefer supply network because, number one, even for a single ingredient or material, you could have multiple suppliers in multiple different places. You might only be using one, or you might be using multiple ones at a time to try to get the best price, or to, make your supply situation more resilient. And so I like to look at it less as a chain and more as a plate of spaghetti, because it's this intertwining morass of different things going different places, and when it's well designed, all coming together to make that final product. And so huge differences from business to business and industry to industry. Think about that chemical world. A lot of those companies are vertically integrated, and so you might have a chemical company that's sourcing its hydrocarbons and then doing all the different steps itself through the process to get even to final products. Whereas, like at General Mills, we had different suppliers all over the world, and those suppliers are coming together at a specific General Mills site. We don't own any of those suppliers. It's all outside firms that are selling to us, and then we're producing that final product and then shipping it on to our customers, which are actually the retailers, and then our consumers, who are their customers, who buy the things at the grocery stores. And so when we talk about supply chain as this kind of, common thing, it's not common at all. It looks different everywhere you go, as you know yourself, very different piece for what you guys do too. And so that to me is one of the big challenges in understanding some of the current difficulties is, what is it that's hitting any given business, and what's the root cause? And I think the unusual thing right now is you have these crunches in multiple places all at the same time. So it's hitting a lot more suppliers. Think about like the oil crunch in the 1970s. It was only oil, and it had impact beyond that because prices were crazy, but it wasn't impacting other businesses directly. Where now, heck, I ordered a pool table in March. It's only now found out today it's coming for delivery. So this stuff's just nuts with the delays and the difficulties in getting materials.
And I think you can probably consider yourself lucky that it was
Oh, I know.
only 6-8 months.
I know, that's right.
Where
We
a
were
couple of
talking
years,
about whether we'd ever get it.
a couple of years ago, you would have probably said, "What do you mean 8 months? I want this
Right.
thing in under 8 weeks, and
Yep.
and not 8 months." And we're hearing on TV. So you're the layman out there, and you're not in manufacturing like you are, Jim. That supply chain, and everyone thinks it's the ports and it's not enough trains, or not, the ships are stuck out there. That's kind of getting toward the end user part of
Right.
it. But
Yep.
there's a whole nother supply chain, like you said, the plate of spaghetti that goes into the manufacturing before a finished product is even being made.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, think about the chip situation that's gotten so much airplay, especially as it impacts, my home state's world with the auto industry. And that's a whole other set of suppliers and producers that are impacted before you ever think about making a car, right? The little tiny chips, one little rounding error on what the whole car is, but it's literally holding up the whole production of cars for America.
It might as well be a tire shortage where you can't put the tires on them, because that little chip is holding it up just like any other component that literally you have to have in order for that vehicle. And I mean, it's crazy, because you think of the automotive industry, or you think of maybe the food industry. I know our industry, we've had to think way ahead and place purchase orders a year in advance for raw materials to make sure we have them, because you can't make something if you don't have all your raw materials. And right now there's labor shortages. So I think that's impacting everybody. And you've been in that your whole career, obviously. What would you say, Jim, is your favorite part of being involved in this manufacturing industry as a whole? And you get to touch so many people now with your writing and with your podcast. What's your favorite part of this whole thing?
My favorite thing is I just treasure the people who are in this world, because as I have taken to saying, unlike so many other businesses, in manufacturing, there's no hiding. You're either making a product that you're providing to someone when they need it at a price that's good for them and that makes you a profit, or you're going out of business. And, not to disparage anyone in the rest of the world, but that to me puts this kind of special burden on people where they have to deliver the goods, and there's no fooling. You're either delivering the goods or you're not. And so, as I've spent all these years in manufacturing and been in situations where, things got difficult, or we needed to do something fast that was unexpected, and you just see people who will step up and just do anything it takes to get the job done and to get those products made and out to their customers and keep everyone along the way happy. It's just a special group of people that it's just been my absolute honor to be part of.
Oh, that is absolutely awesome. And people are what makes it go. I have to agree with you. People are what make it happen. And I know you and I are huge advocates of American manufacturing. We look at your whole history, and everything was in American manufacturing. I know it's important to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And my hope is that one of the silver linings with all the difficulties, both with COVID and with the, somewhat related and somewhat not supply chain situation, is that we'll have an honest reckoning around, geez, maybe it wasn't such a good idea to send so much of our production overseas all these years, and bring some of this back. I'm not saying we never buy from anyone overseas. I believe in trade with other countries, and I believe in the power that brings to lift other nations that haven't been as fortunate as the US and bring them up in the economic standing. But at the same time, to bankrupt our small towns and to just destroy whole cultures because you're chasing this absolute bottom dollar price out there in the world market. And then you suddenly find out, I've stretched it way too thin and made it so tenuous that all of a sudden my business is at risk because something bad happened. It wouldn't have gone that way if we kept a good chunk of that on our shores.
Oh, hallelujah. I think you knew that was coming from me. So,
Right.
Jim, you had some awesome positions working in industry and working multiple different levels of manufacturing and industry making things. Yep. How did those positions align you or set you up for success to now work with Forbes? I mean, come on, Forbes is a big deal when it comes to industry and it comes to business and references for all of us who are out in business. And now you're a contributing writer about industry and manufacturing to it. How did those jobs set you up for success there?
So my whole career of doing all that stuff is what gave me the expertise and the credibility and the broad scope of knowledge to be able to write about the things and write about what are sometimes some difficult topics and put it into a message that's more broadly understandable by, it's what I'm writing for is the general business community, not the manufacturing community. And so non-specialists understanding what I'm writing about, regardless of the difficulty of the topic. Obviously, I had some great education years ago in writing, and I've always been a writer, just never pursuing it professionally. I've written for internal company publications, for trade journals, for all kinds of different things. And I always say the Forbes thing was entirely the hand of God. It wasn't anything that I necessarily targeted as this is something I want to do someday. It was, I got big on LinkedIn with just being an advocate from my own experience for manufacturing and kind of putting out there what my views were. And one day I get on LinkedIn and one of my contacts shared a post from one of his contacts saying, I need someone to write magazine length articles about manufacturing. And I thought, well, I can do that, right? So I sent the woman a note and she emailed me back within an hour and she said, I've looked at your stuff on LinkedIn and it looks fabulous to me. So I'm copying so-and-so at Forbes and you two take it from here. And my immediate thought was, well, okay, Forbes, that's not happening. There's no way.
that's kind of a big, Jim, you're a big deal.
Well, it was funny because before I could even shoot off a note to that contact that she had copied, I got a note from her and she's my editor now. And she said, okay, I looked at the stuff you have, but get me some samples that are more, along the lines of the specific kind of article we're talking about. So I took some of the trade journal pieces I'd written a few years ago and sent those off and we got on the phone. And it was within a week or two, we're on the phone and she says, yeah, everything looks great. I'm sending you a contract. And I remember walking in the house that night and talking to my wife. I think I'm going to be writing for Forbes. It's still just not really getting through until that contract actually showed up and was signed. And 3 years ago. And it's 200 plus articles along the way. And here we are today.
Well, you just stole my thunder because that was my next question. 200 articles on your third anniversary, yep, being a Forbes contributor. Congratulations, first of all, on that. That is pretty cool. But tell us, Forbes contributor, tell us what that really entitles, what that means.
Well, so what it means is I am working in a specific business area, providing content to Forbes. So I'm kind of an independent contractor who is under contract to Forbes to supply a certain number of articles every month, of a certain length. And there's obviously, all the writer's guides and editorial standards that were shared up front. And so it's just providing them content from my own area of expertise, but again, targeting that general business reader that they have as their customer.
So give us an example of some of the companies that you have covered. And then with those companies, we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the topics.
Yep. Well, of course, two of my favorites were Duluth Pack and Spring Break Manufacturing.
Oh boy, flattery will get you everywhere around here.
And we should talk about those two for sure. But to tee that up initially, go to your the point of your question. It's been everything from one of our common friends is the folks over at Stormy Cromer. They were one of my earliest articles, and it was because they're right there in my hometown of Ironwood. But knowing the story that the Jackwards had, the fabric shop that goes back, into the mid 1900s, and then coming through with Bob Jackward building that into this more global business and doing all kinds of crazy stuff in fabrics, and then getting the opportunity to buy the Stormy Cromer name and bring that product back from the brink, which is a story you've experienced personally as well. That to me is just one of the kind of quintessential tales of what American manufacturers do is, find that opportunity and put in the hard work and get a good team and deliver the goods. So it's little companies like what Bob and Gina have there in Ironwood, all the way up to, I went out and visited GM Defense a couple months ago and drove the infantry squad vehicle and wrote about them bringing back their defense arm because of the realization that, so they'd been in defense, even going back to World War I, and then got out of it in the early 2000s, brought it back because they said, we see a problem in how defense supply works and we think we can help fix it. So it's both, providing a needed product to our war fighters, but it's also, we can't take forever and a day to develop these defense vehicles or products and then have them canceled at the last minute. Let's turn this around and get that development world accelerated and really focus it on delivering value at a good price and taking care of our people who are paying for that as well, the taxpayers. So
the taxpayer,
just give them
right.
all kinds of credit.
Nice. And give us some of your favorite topics that you've been able to. I know you love manufacturing and it gets you excited, and you're an engineer, so you want to learn, because we've had this discussion before that everywhere you go into, it's like, oh, that's new, and it's like a shiny light. We got to go check this out. You're an engineer and you want to see how it works and all that.
Yep.
Tell us some of your the if you would, the most fun you've had when you've dug into an article with a company on what they make and just some neat stories and experiences you've had that we as the regular person out here may never think about.
Yeah. Well, so I'll give you a couple. One, definitely, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, being a lifelong cyclist. And it was one that I thought, these guys would be really cool to learn more about and cover. So I got in touch with the people at SRAM, the bicycle components manufacturer headquartered in Chicago. They make Zip wheels, they make Avid brakes, Truvative components, in addition to their own SRAM drivetrain components. They own rock shocks, things that people know about by themselves, but don't realize necessarily they're under this umbrella of these guys in Chicago. So I rarely get to go visit the people I write about, because number one, obviously it'd be a heck of a lot of travel, but number two, it just wouldn't make sense. It's stuff I can easily cover from afar. But since they're not that far away, I went down to the headquarters in Chicago and met with those guys and learned all about how they'd come from, this group of triathletes back in the 1980s who came up with a new way of shifting and tried to sell it into the road bike world, and it didn't really take off. And then mountain biking came along and their grip shift just went nuts there. And they grew both by, growing their own business on that, adding their own products, but then buying these other companies. And it's just phenomenal. So getting to dig into that hobby aspect, the thing, like I said earlier, it's what got me into mechanical engineering and what got me into manufacturing was that love of bicycling and the mechanical aspects. So learning all about what they do and how they do it, and getting to ride with one of their guys on a like $11,000 Pinarello with electronic shifting along the lakeshore of Lake Michigan. That was pretty cool.
You didn't break it, did you?
I did not. Thank
okay.
No, I delivered it back in one piece. Thank God. So that one was really neat. The other one, and it's actually related because we did a story with SRAM with these guys, but I've done a series of articles with Autodesk. So Autodesk, if you're not familiar, has all kinds of different design and scheduling tools. They started with their flagship product back in the 1980s called AutoCAD, one of the earliest, and today now the most successful computer-aided design program out there. And I remember at my first job going for training on AutoCAD when we were going away from the guys on the drafting tables doing mechanical drawings by hand and finally coming into the computer world.
Boy, in those days, pretty rudimentary back in those days too.
Yeah, that's how far back I go. And now, yeah, the things you can do, not just in bringing what was done back then into the computer, but now, 3D design, and there's a thing called generative design where you don't even do the drawing, you put in parameters, and it's an AI application that then generates, thousands of different iterations and hands you like top 5 solutions to what you want to design, and gives you that drawing automatically. And so, I did some work with them on stuff like Hyundai's doing these super mobile off-road vehicles, like a combination of wheels and legs that they're designing. And so they're using Autodesk tools for that. I did a thing on a company that Autodesk invested in called Factory OS, where they're doing modular construction. You think about what that typically means is like, trailer homes, but it's not that. It's doing things in a factory for construction that are then transported to a site and assembled. So, you're industrializing part of the process and making it that much more efficient. So they did this series of articles with Autodesk, and then some stuff farther afield, like Leica Studios, the stop motion studio. They use Autodesk tools for scheduling and for design of puppets or whatever that they use to do their stop motion animation. And so, yeah, stuff you'd never think that this company that came out of the industrial world would be doing. And then I wrapped it up just a couple of weeks ago with an article about Autodesk proper and kind of where they've been and where they see their business going.
Wow, that's fascinating when you think about the artificial intelligence and how you just put in the parameters and it starts spitting out designs for maybe thousands of designs, and you're saying, but I want the 5 best ones, and the artificial intelligence is going to figure that out for you. That is crazy.
Well, and the other cool thing too, one area that I've written quite a bit about is 3D printing. And so you can also input what your production method is going to be, or methods. And what the tie back to SRAM is Autodesk and SRAM partnered up to reimagine the bicycle crank arm. So that arm that's on the axle down at the bottom that, comes out and then goes down to your pedal, and you turn that to turn the chain. That's a piece that no one's really ever put a lot of work into. They've certainly done some lightweighting, taking material out of it, but they put that through generative design and came up with these just crazy crank arm designs. So like one that looks like a lattice, one that looks like a structural truss, and just stuff that you couldn't even have made years ago. Some of it's 3D printing, some of it's advanced CNC, computerized numerical control machining.
That's a question I have, Jim, is they can take it from that design then and plug it into a 3D printer and make their first rendition?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So what the computer hands you as the design, it's a file that can go straight to either a 3D printer or even a CNC machine, and it's just makes the part.
So you can put in parameters such as the strength parameters you feel you need so that it doesn't start making things too lightweight that are going to break or have a failure.
Yeah. Think about the crank arm. Obviously, it's got to be able to take the load that you're putting on it with your legs. It has to be able to handle like shocks to itself, like especially mountain biking, you run into a big rock with your pedal. The crank arm has to handle that load. So you put those loads in. It has size limitations. You don't want it hitting your ankle. And so you put those size limitations in. Sometimes it's material limitations. Again, method of production, all of that goes in. And yeah, then the computer does its work and gives you options that solve your problem.
Why didn't we think of that, right?
I'm just a mechanical engineer.
Well, a heck of a good writer, because you have almost 1 million page views in 3 years of your posted articles.
Yeah.
And what kind of stress as you go, and now you have 200 plus articles, 1 million page views, 3 years under your belt. How do you keep creative, and how stressful is it to find new and interesting topics to write about?
Well, that was actually one of the first things I worried about going into it is, geez, how am I going to come up with ideas to keep this going over time? What I found out very quickly, though, is there are people professionally focused on that. So PR people that I'm sure you work with as well, who are out there kind of beating the bushes to get their products, their companies' publicity. And so I get pitches from PR people all the time. And those, I mean, it's phenomenal because it's, 10 times what I could ever write about. I don't even want to tell you how my inbox suffers from all that, but
sure.
But that's great. And the cool thing about that is I get ideas for things I never would have thought about. I mean, who would know that Hyundai's doing that crazy vehicle with Autodesk? So that came from one of those folks. But, that being said, I still really love the ones where it's kind of me thinking, geez, what would be a cool story? And getting with folks myself. So a good example there is my story about Zamboni. So the ice resurfacing machine, which, anyone from our part of the world is very familiar with. A friend of mine on LinkedIn posted something about the history of the founder of Zamboni. And I looked at that and thought, well, that would be really cool. And I actually commented on LinkedIn, geez, I had to write about these folks. There was a PR guy in LA who I've worked with on other stories, commented and said, if you're really interested, I can help you out. And we touched base on email. He says, I don't rep them, but I think you would do phenomenal work telling their story. So if you really want to get a hold of them, I can put you in touch with the family. And so
you did.
He did. And I mean, they had me talk to people all over the world. I don't know how many employees of Zamboni company I talked to, but yeah, that will always be one of my favorite stories because they're just such fantastic people. And they've got this product that, if you don't know the history, you should read my article because it literally changed, the game of hockey. It changed the whole ice sports world. And there's just this enormous savings of labor and difficulty and just made life ever so much easier for so many people. And here they are still doing what they do years later, going into electrification, keeping up with the modern world, but it's still Zamboni.
I do have to say though, and I'm a hockey guy and played for a lot of years and still go to games, but you got to be able to smell some of that propane when you go in the arena, right? From the Zamboni.
Right.
That's an interesting story because in a past life of mine, one of our offices in Florida, the office manager, her maiden name was Zamboni.
Yep.
And when I first met her, she's like, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from northern Minnesota." And she goes, "Well, you've obviously heard of a Zamboni." And I said, yes, they're pretty much on just about every street corner, right? Because we have a lot of hockey arenas and ice rinks. Yep. And she said, "Well, that is I think it was her great grandpa."
Wow, very cool.
That founded Zamboni. So there's a fun one. So after nearly 1 million views, 3 years, 200 articles for Forbes, Jim starts a podcast.
Yeah. more than a podcast. It's a YouTube show and podcast. So I do video and audio.
He does.
As you know.
He does, because I was
because you were on
I was
it.
lucky enough to be a guest on it. And we just do the audio part because people don't want to look at me too much here. And so you can stick with that part. And then they on that one episode, they can block part of the screen out. But you do this podcast and this YouTube, Manufacturing Talks on Air with Jim Vanosky. Tell us all about that, how you got that started, why you got that started, and where it's going.
Yeah. So a friend of mine suggested I look at it just as another, means of sharing all these cool stories that I get to come across in the manufacturing world. And as I got just kind of casually digging into it after he suggested it, I learned pretty quickly there's really not much out there at all for manufacturing in the podcast world. And obviously the podcast world has just gone gangbusters, and there's endless podcasts about everything. Not to say there aren't some really great ones out there. And I swear I find a new one every day. So it wasn't just me coming with the idea to fill the gap, but I thought, you know what? Even with the ones I can find, there's none that focuses just on what I do with my Forbes work, which is just telling the stories that I think are super cool and digging into, what is this business about? How did it come about? Who did the hard work and got it going? And then, where is it today and where's it headed? And that's what I do. I just really focus on the same stuff and talk to people like you who are out there in the trenches, making it happen in the manufacturing world.
So who are some of the companies that you have had on there so far on your podcast and YouTube?
So, the first one, the guy I think is just the quintessential example of what can happen magically in the manufacturing world, a guy named Titan Gilroy, who, he grew up homeless. He was, kind of on a bad path himself, spent some time in jail. And at one point, kind of at the same time, discovered CNC machining, which we talked about earlier, computerized machining, and God. And those two things together set him on a path, number one, to establish his own company. And after a few difficult ups and downs, made it successful. He's down in Flower Mountain, Texas now with a big, huge CNC machine shop. He wound up doing a YouTube he did a reality show for a while of his own, all about CNC machining. He established a CNC machining academy where you can get almost free training to be a CNC programmer, machinist. And so he's out there helping, young folks go into the trades, into a lucrative career, continues to provide jobs with his company, and does the most phenomenal machining YouTube videos now. You should go out and check out his videos.
I wrote it down.
Titan Gilroy was a phenomenal guest. He was my first one, but I had Bob Jackward on at Stormy Cromer, talked about his story. My next one is a guy named Dean Wegner, West Point grad, former Army chopper pilot, and then realized, there's this wreck of an industry of American apparel that we ought to really be focusing on. So Authentically American came about, and he's out there bringing apparel business back to our shores.
Folks, today we have Jim Vanosky, a Forbes contributor who has almost 1 million page views in 3 years and 200 articles for Forbes, podcast and YouTube. And it's all about industry and manufacturing. And so, Jim, we're going to move into this segment that we call the packed questions. So we've talked all about you and your life getting to where you are now and working in industry and manufacturing and getting into being a writer with Forbes and a podcaster and world renowned. Now we're going to get some packed questions personal questions. We're going personal.
Okay, fair enough.
If you could have dinner with anyone in history, who would it be?
That's a good question. I think Henry Ford I would love to hear straight from the guy's own mouth how he made the whole the mass production of automobiles back when automobiles were just coming around, and brought that to Americans as something, the average Joe could own. Automated production back when it was just automating the movement of the thing so workers could do their bit and have it move along and not have to manually move cars around. Yeah, so the assembly line, learn all about it straight from Henry Ford.
That would be pretty cool if you could do a podcast on Henry Ford.
I want him on my show.
Exactly. I think you'd have a lot of listeners. Favorite movie of all time?
A Bridge Too Far, World War II movie.
Why?
So I'm also a huge World War II buff, and that was one of the earliest movies I saw. It was made back in the 1960s. It's based on an actual history book by a guy named Cornelius Ryan. And I've read everything Cornelius Ryan wrote since I watched that movie. And it's interestingly about a failed operation, one the Allies lost, called Market Garden, Operation Market Garden in Holland, where the British General Montgomery thought he could drive his way into the northern part of Germany in the summer of 1944 and bring the war to an early end. And unfortunately, it didn't work out. And we wound up kind of back at the start after some pretty serious losses. But, it's really interesting because you can always watch the triumphant stories, but to watch one where, we gave it our best effort and still came up short, even though we're the Allies and we know in the end we won. It's just, I think, a really good educational lesson.
Awesome. Bucket list activity that you have not been able to do yet?
Grand Western trip with my 2 teenage sons. So as I mentioned, I was from Ironwood, but my mom actually grew up in the high desert in Southern Oregon. So we would be out there every other summer when I was growing up. And I've seen all the Western states. So we'd make a point of visiting all the national parks and things. I mentioned my dad was in the U.S. Forest Service, so big outdoorsman. And so I've seen all that personally. They haven't. And I want to do that. And actually thinking about it for not next summer, but the one after, before my older son goes off to college.
Time is ticking.
Right. Well, we'll get it. We'll get it definitely scheduled.
Yeah, exactly. And your favorite meal, Jim?
Well, I'm from Ironwood, Michigan, and I'm actually having it tonight, and that would be pasties.
Oh,
we have to describe that, right? Meat and potato pies, basically.
And you know what? I just had those in deer camp about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, perfect.
And we actually heated them over a water bath on the wood stove before we went out for the afternoon sit, so that they wouldn't burn.
Yeah,
pasties for dinner. Boy, they're filling. If you don't know what a pasty is, I'm sorry, folks, you're just going to have to look it up, Google up what a pasty is. And you haven't had any Midwest food till you've had a pasty.
Right.
Oh, you know what? I'm thinking of that now. Son of a God.
You're off to the pasty shop after we're done here.
Exactly. Folks, today we've had Jim Vinosky, and not only is he a contributor to Forbes magazine and for 3 years written 200 articles, over 1 million page views, but he's been in manufacturing and industry for 30 years and is just a wealth of knowledge, has started a podcast about, the name of it is Manufacturing Talks. Jim, where can people find you on that?
Yep, on YouTube. Just search for Manufacturing Talks, you'll find it. And then we're on most of the popular podcast outlets. Just look us up and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to send you directly our YouTube link and RSS feeds, or watch for that next episode. I'll be posting it there next Tuesday morning.
Perfect. Folks, this has been Jim Vinosky. This is the Leader of the Pack podcast. And until next time, unplug from the indoors and recharge in the outdoors.